I'm on the... Oh, we've already started. Hello, people. Welcome to the Aion lecture number 14. I am your host, Stephen Fox. I come from them Cork and Kerry mountains, you know, come from down in Kerry town, and I'm joined by James P. Downing. How are you, sir?
All right, mate. Hello. My name's James. I'm an utter wanker. It's fucking insane, man. How are you today, Stefan? You're looking very handsome, mate. You're a very good looking man. I like you've got your new webcam, because people were saying you have a potato camera, but you don't anymore because you're really smart and handsome Irishman, whereas I'm just a degenerate British. I'm just British. Like, there's nothing we can do about it. How are you, Stefan?
You know, that's a thing. Well, I was just sitting there chronically masturbating the other day, drinking me pointed Guinness, and I thought to myself that I might upgrade the camera just for the crack, you know, just for the odd crack. I can't do this anymore. It's actually upsetting me. I can't be a full Irishman. It's not in my heritage.
It's upsetting me as well. My name is James, and we're here to talk about Aion. And it's quite sure that you're going to enjoy this. All right. So we're here today. I'm going to stop there. We're here today. I have got a brand new mic because all of you are saying that I live inside a potato, and that is actually, I live in Ireland, so that's sort of true. but now I am here to present you with the high definition version of Stefan. And we haven't said it yet, but we'll say it again. Boyo fucking alert. Put your pants on, stand up straight, stick your shoulders out, and do a somersault. Here we go. We're going to go into Aion, and we're here to talk about Aion 14, or our 14th step into the Aion Odyssey. And we're going to go into the idea of the gods within, because last lecture we were talking about the will of God, James, weren't we? And that was the way that it seems that there are forces within your mind that control your thoughts and control your instincts. And now we're going to get deeper, and this is where we get sort of pagan-y. We're going to get deeper into the idea of the psychological conceptualization of gods within, such as instincts and emotions that control your fate and lead you. And this is where we're going to start digging into the idea of the archetypes. And I think you're going to really enjoy this. James, any thoughts?
Yes, many thoughts. On the course of this Odyssey, we've gone from almost atheist Nietzsche type talking about the death of God and we don't know what to do about it, we might as well create the Ubermensch, to paganism, to Christianity, to paganism, to all that degeneracy while we just watch the West burn. Looks like we've gone from Christianity, we're now going to head straight back into paganism again, because the conception of the gods is incredibly difficult. It's always been, or at least the polytheistic gods have always been different emotions and different instincts which take you over, and then these two emotions will rise up amongst a group of people and clash together. You have a little conflict going on. But Jung wants to dig into the deep psychology of why they are gods, why they're not just emotions. The scientists saying they're just emotions, they're wrong. They are actually gods living in your head, and you do their bidding whether or not you like it or not.
Yes, people. So we're going to start dancing with some very, very difficult and complex, but hopefully we'll make them tangible concepts and metaphors. One of them will be the Eros and Logos dynamic, because the pagan gods are in the realm of Eros, in the realm of feelings, whereas Logos seems to be a lot more orientated towards something like, how's my mic there?
It's beautiful. Sounds beautiful to me.
Okay. It's a lot more orientated towards something like the idea of a truth and a noble moral instinct of doing what is right, whereas Eros is more about leading with your anger, leading with your passion, leading with your fury. And oftentimes the pagan gods are conceptualized as our emotions deified. Like the most angry, ruthless, violent person is Aries when you distill it up to its highest point. The most beautiful, attractive, gorgeous woman is Aphrodite. And the way these two instincts, the way the violent willpower of man interacts with the beautiful, attractive quality of woman becomes like a god, a set of psychological realities that every time you get a strong warrior character, he's probably going to attract the beautiful princess. And this is getting into the paganism of it. But then we get into these higher instincts, such as the moral instinct, like doing what is right and sacrificing your passions on all levels. So this is what something like Christ or the idea of sacrifice would be. Or even you could think, here's a good one to make it more tangible, the idea of the Spartan king Leonidas, and he stands for Logos. So he stands up against Xerxes, and Xerxes is like, I will give you power beyond your every conception, and you will have women and wine and a kingdom as part of my grand empire, because I'm God King Xerxes. And Leonidas, on principle, decides to sacrifice his life against immeasurable odds and almost guaranteed it'll be taken over anyway. But he stands defiantly regardless, and that's a conquest of his logos over his emotions. And we're starting to move into this idea of what is this logos and what does it represent? And it seems to bring itself closer to the idea of what we could call the Christian God and the hero of the Christian myth, which is Jesus. And that seems to pedestalize itself over the pagan gods. But in my head, I don't see how the pagan gods aren't real. And this is where it's becoming quite weird. This is all psychological reality as well. This is another strange thing. And then on top of that, we have to layer in the idea of destiny, that if you are controlled by your pagan emotions, you will have a very specific destiny. The more angry you are, the more Aries-like you'll be, the more you will get dragged into the world of your anger, and you'll be led by that thing. But the more you can develop yourself and individualize, the more you'll be able to get led by your logos. And when you finally get to that point where you've got this logos, you think you're at this point of free will, but really your logos is informed by this moral instinct, which is in some sense not you either. And then you are getting to the idea that you're controlled by the highest God. And this is where my mind is floating with all this stuff. Jimmy Boyo, Jiminy Cricket, how are you, sir? What do you think of all that stuff?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this recently, Christianity and paganism, which one is correct? Because I like to throw in with the Christian camp because I'm a nice young Catholic boy. But then it does become a problem. So Christianity, it seems, does have an explanation for the emotions. It does have an Eros factor as well as the logos factor. And for example, the love of God and all the emotions that come up, some of them are sinful so that you suppress them. But there seems the psychological approach to this, the Jungian approach to this, is like they're all real and they're all true. Even though Jung himself was like a practicing Protestant, as far as I'm aware, at least for the majority of his life, they're all true and they're all real. So it comes down to, wait, like, can you go into a particular religious framework once you break open this door of psychology? Because if you prove that both exist, surely that shows that both are incomplete. Therefore, which one of them is true? And then to me, the only real, following that line of logic, the only real way to get around that is to say that Jungian psychology is a religion, which is so terrifying because it's like, these are the real gods. The others kind of have it right. It's just incomplete. And then it's like, can you imagine going around as the Church of Jung? Being like, he has the gods correct. The anima exists. Whereas in Christianity, the anima does exist in a particular form, if you know what I mean. So he's lending credence to both Christianity and to paganism. And it's like, I don't know how we're meant to go about that in the modern world, because you can't just dismiss one or the other. They're both real. So I don't know what the hell to do about that, man.
So what we're suggesting here, people, is that from now on, when you want to watch these lectures, you must wear a red robe in the style of an ancient Roman, and paint a ashen cross made of the burnt ashes of a pigeon on your forehead, and that will be this is the beginning of our cult. The cult begins. What are we done in here? Oh, it's a black towel. So
I've decided to become a pilgrim, ladies and gentlemen. We're going down to Canterbury today, just like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. I feel much more holy now.
He's now the shadow. That's what it's got. This is a very good point. It's a very difficult problem for me to sort out. I don't know what to make of it at all. I see the way that Christianity was adapted onto the pagan world, and you see that the Christians who came to Ireland, for example, the old Irish gods like Bridget and the angels all became part of the Christian pantheon, with Christ as like the king over them all. But this Christian pantheon was nonetheless part of that picture. And that's because it was almost impossible for the Christian story to assert itself as literally the only metaphysical reality, the Christ-God dynamic, because that offended people's nature and emotion so much that it was almost ineffective. Now, that doesn't mean that Christianity is wrong. I've spent a lot of time reading the book of Matthew recently in the Bible and whatnot, and I'm coming to the conclusion that Christianity is not setting forth a religion. The religion is actually something that you create out of the story, but the Christian story, the actual biblical story, is literally almost like a historical document of what went on, and you draw your own conclusions out of that. And so they warn against the idea of deifying. Like, this is the Bible is a fascinating story, because it's literally just saying that God put this chosen people on earth, and they were Noah's sons. And these people, all they had to do was obey God, because God had a set of rules. And if they obeyed them, God would make their destiny work. And the problem was that every time they obeyed him, they would build a big kingdom. and Israel and Judah, and they build this big kingdom. And then what would happen is they get cocky. They'd be like, we built a big kingdom, and then they'd start worshiping the pagan gods. Now the idea is worshiping. It's not. He's the God of the Bible is asserting that these gods aren't real. They aren't the truth. Like he is. He is the actual one who controls destiny. And the illusion is that these more Eros-based pagan gods are, I guess those emotions exist, but they're not the fundamental destiny controlling forces. The God is asserting that he is, and he is able to fill you full of Eros with the Holy Spirit whenever he wants. He can just, pop it into you, and then you can do something. And actually the way he affects history seems to be his ability to arouse fiery emotions in people. So when the Israelites go get into sodomy and start burning children to Baal, and then this is where we get cannibal from, and then they'd the priest would put the child and sacrifice him to Baal, and then start eating the child afterwards, and God was just like, for fuck sake, like, what's going on here? So yeah, God sends the Israelites in to kill them. The Israelites then start doing similar stuff, and then God fires up the Assyrians with the spirit of Ares, if you will, and so the Assyrians charge down and kill the Israelites, and that is the story of the Bible, as building up these great empires based on good principles, and then losing touch with that because of arrogance, and then that thing collapsing. And that is the story of almost every great empire you can think about. I think we're going through it to a large extent now. Like the modern West was built on the consolidation of great principles, and now we're starting to lose it and be like, sodomy, and then everybody's like deifying the lineage of the pagan lineage, which is deifying the Eros. And it's not to say that stuff isn't real, because that's like saying your emotions aren't real, but it's saying that they're not the actual things that control the world and make destiny happen. Whereas if you talk to someone in America who's a bit like insane at the moment, they'll say, but my feelings matter most. And that's a very specific instigation of this broader problem, where you've got people losing touch with the metaphysic of logos and deifying Eros, and then that boils all the way down to the fact that they can just say my feelings are reality, and logos is a lie, and God is dead, and then they just go sodomize each other while the world burns. And it's
Jesus, man.
It's all happening, man. It's all happening. So yeah. That is my spin on that. That is my spin on that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm trying to come up with like a balance between logos and Eros, because if you say that logos is a higher value than Eros, we'll guess, at the end of the day, then it's like that to me becomes a little bit of a problem. It's almost like you've got to balance them. So this is an interesting thing. When people who are Christians talk about love, they talk about like the love of God and God's love for you. So it's almost like your relationship to the self, psychic totality, right? That people who go through that sincerely say that feels like peace. Like all that feels like to me is I don't feel happy from that. I just get peace, and peace is like balance. Everything's sort of working together. So the Eros factor that I guess is important within that logos framework is love of God. So there is a feeling factor that is important. It's not just you abstractly think I will do the will of God, because that's almost too heady and that's unsustainable. That's more war. Because when it comes to logos factor, you will have like a sword, a long sharp thing, like clashing with each other. But then at the same time, you have to balance it off with that Eros love factor. And you had like Mary's love for Jesus and things like this, and then the disciples' love for Jesus. Like, what the hell does that mean? So this is why Christianity gets criticized as being like a religion for hippies and weirdos. It's like we all have to love each other. It's like, well, maybe. It's like that's what all the denominations say. It's like love is the highest value, but it's like God's love, and God is like logos. So it's like a weird mix between the two. So it's like that's incredibly strange to me. But to solve also the pagan problem, the anima and the animus and the other gods, etc., come from the self in many ways. So it's like no one gets to the Father except through me. You just might have to confront the emotions along the way, all the psychic twisty turny bits along the way, and then you go and you reach the Lord our God. But it's bloody confusing, man. And also this is incredibly hot on my head. I don't know how the pilgrims do it.
Take it off, dude, because when you were just talking to me about Mary and all that, and then you're wearing that, it was just very strange.
did it make you feel like I was your mother? Did you have a little Oedipal
sort
problem?
Of. You were like, yeah, but love. It was a good point. I get what you're saying, and it is quite a challenge. This is something that I'm trying to sort out, and we'll dig into the chapter now because I think it explains it quite well. Jung frames the higher logos instinct as an instinct. He doesn't say it's sort of a logical thing. He says that there is a higher instinct, and that is the instinct for logos. and that instinct is in essence a feeling, which makes it in essence a god as well. And it's the way it comes into you. And this idea of freedom, of us having an autonomous personality, is a very hard thing to conceptualize, but it does seem to exist. But nonetheless, it's influenced by this moral instinct, which I guess you could call your conscience. Like, you know when you're talking shit. We talked about this last time, and in the side of my book here, I have David Icke written down. I have no idea why. I can't remember. That was probably from 2 weeks ago, but that's related to that topic somehow. But it's like that idea of I guess this is what I was getting at probably with David Icke, is that David Icke is gone out there and said some really, really crazy and assertive things, but he actually ended up calling out like pedophilia with that Jimmy Savile motherfucker and all that shit. And he was getting like crushed by his society. Everybody was like, you're insane, you're literally just a retard, what are you doing, you're so embarrassing. But there was some instinct in him that would not allow him to bullshit himself, and so he kind of put his voice out there regardless. And that is him leading away from the instincts which would be like, is fit in with the crowd, don't like, you get all those negative emotions when people are shaming you. But instead, David Icke is like, no, I'm just going to keep presenting my truth, because I would rather obey that moral instinct in my head, that conscience, because when I disobey that, the feeling is horrible. It's a different type of shame. It's an internalized shame, and you're having that little godlike war in your head, and that is in essence following a feeling to a large extent. And the idea of who we are is not anything to do with this compendium of instincts acting in our heads behind us, but more to do with the simple ability to choose which instinct we choose to get led by. It's almost like you have a pattern of destinies, and some of them are pagan, one of them seems to be this moral one, and you choose which one you obey. And the idea of you having this free will about what your destiny is less to do with that. It's more to do which path you choose to take, and they will lead you in that type of sense. That's a crazy idea.
That is a crazy idea. Absolutely crazy idea. Shall we crack on into the text, sir?
Yes, quite, sir. Let's crack on to the text. Yes, jolly good.
Yeah, fuck you. We're on paragraph 49, page 26.
Towel on the head adds gravitas. Sorry, dude, that just came out there.
Maybe I should put it back on again. Maybe later.
Okay.
If, on the other hand, the inner authority is conceived as the will of God, which implies that natural forces are divine forces, our self-esteem is benefited, because the decision then appears to be an act of obedience, and the result a divine intention. This way of looking at it can, with some show of justice, be accused not only of being very convenient, but of cloaking moral laxity in the mantle of virtue. The accusation, however, is justified only when one is in fact knowingly hiding one's own egoistic opinion beside a hypocritical facade of words. But this is by no means the rule, for in most cases the instinctive tendencies assert themselves for or against one's subjective interests, no matter whether an outside authority approves or not. Have you got any thoughts on that absolute jumble of word salad, Stefan?
I'd actually like to ask you, sir, because this is something you've been playing with a lot recently. Like, tell us what you think about that, especially the idea of having that, because this is when we're getting to this logos idea, and this is the ego inflation and sort of the satanic side of it, is that you have this logos in you that's giving you this emotion of shame when you bitch out in your words, when you don't say what's real, when you're not being authentic or whatever. And then you have this ability to pretend you're being authentic with your words. You can, conduct wizardry, as Owen Benjamin says, and pretend you're being authentic with your words and present this reality. But then inside your own head, you're completely know what you're doing. It's kind of it's manipulative. And so when people ask you what you're doing, you're sort of saying, oh, I'm just telling my truth. Like, do you see how that would work? It's like you might say something that's quite sinister or degenerate or weird. And like, like all children just cut their dicks off or some shit like that. Or you start getting into these weird, very, very strange moral places where you're like, all right, how can we transgenderize children and all that? And you start speaking about that. And there's probably an instinct going off in you, or maybe you've killed it a long time ago, but there is some instinct in you that wants you to react against that and say, I'm not sure if I should just go out and assert this as the reality I want to happen. But then instead of you doing that, you put that stuff forward and you say, this is my truth. you sort of lie to the truth, and you say, this is my truth. This whole trying to transgender kids, this is my truth. This is my reality. I am doing the will of God. I am telling my truth, and their transgender truth is their truth. And so it's very manipulative. It's using that idea we have in our head that everybody has an authentic reality that we need to respect to some extent, and it's manipulating it in order to serve a more Eros based God as opposed to a more Logos based God. And I find that interesting. Sir, any thoughts?
Yeah, this is where the mental breakdowns start happening. It's always around stuff like this, because what Jung is saying is that you don't believe 99% of what you say, which is a massive problem. So bring Jordan Peterson into this, of course, which is where, this is where he got all his ideas. He was like, this is where people at Vox Day have accused him of being schizophrenic, which is a absolute bullshit attack as far as I'm concerned. Jordan was saying he started paying attention to what he was saying. And then there was always conveniently the exact same time he started reading Jung, by the way, that he was sitting there, and then every time he'd say something, a voice in his head would say, that's not true. You don't believe that. That's a steaming pile of shit. He was like, oh shit, what do I really believe? So he had to sincerely watch what he was saying. In my personal life, obviously I speak all the time because I'm a normal functioning human. And if you watch how you feel after you say something, you get a very different phenomenological response. Mm-hmm. So I think this is where intellectuals will find themselves, because I find myself here all the time, and it's not good. I can say something that's quite articulate with good vocabulary, and then it makes me feel good, because the other side are like, oh, I didn't think of it like that. That's really smart. And then I go away and I think to myself, what the hell did I even mean by that? I'm just copying what someone else on the internet has said. I'm just spouting things. And then when I really start and think about it, I'm like, I don't really believe that. Because I'll have a conversation with somebody intelligent who knows what they're talking about, and then it all falls apart. So then the question comes up, what the hell do you actually believe? What do you really believe? And what Jung's getting at here is, in the modern world, we've said that the instinct is some leftover animalistic thing, and it's not important. What we have is the will. So something that Nietzsche deified, basically, the will. And what Jung is saying is, like, there is actually a will within you that is instinctual. It's sort of like a mix between the two of them. And what that will wants you to go ahead and do might not be what other things in your head say you should do, and certainly what other people in society tell you should do. But it's still an instinct. It's this will of God idea. It's like, say that. Don't cuck there. Do that. This is what you should do. And fundamentally, it's the conscience. So in this paragraph, Jung was saying that if you cuck to the will and you do what this will of God says, then lots of people who are very rational will say, you're just going with what your gut instinct said. That's not a virtue. That's not a virtue whatsoever. And then they'll play around with it. They'll shove it away. But Jung is saying, no, that's the will of God. And that's what you should be listening to, rather than your ego. Because your ego has so much bullshit attached to it. It's got nonsense fed through from different things in the unconscious, other different lower instincts, what other people think that you should do. So you should listen to that will of God, because that's basically your Jiminy Cricket telling you what you should and shouldn't do. And your life will be far better and more meaningful, and you will feel stronger psychophysiologically than you would otherwise. That's my thoughts, sir.
Very interesting. I do agree. Like, it is quite interesting how the psychological, phenomenological reality of this is pushing you to a place where you have to consider your instincts in your head, such as shame, such as the instinct in your head to betray your words for the sake of gaining social status or acceptance or validation. I think validation is probably the most prominent one. Like, you say stuff to sound smart. You say stuff to like, this is actually, you can digest this quite well with girls. Like, you can go out with a girl and you can learn game, and game works, and there is like strategies and all that stuff. And you can go out there and you can even like run lines and remember stories and all that stuff. And it can even work to a large extent. Like, you can charm and seduce and all that. But the higher level of game, the guys who I would listen to that seem to really know how women work and seem to do well with women, almost always are completely authentic. They're being themselves. And some of the best guys I've ever talked to can be so authentic that women will even admire them for stuff like promiscuity. They can flip all those things that would naturally go against a woman's instinct, and it just turns into an asset for them, because their authenticity is shining through. But on some level, when you're being more of a manipulative, weird gamer dude, you're You know that you're saying something, but it's not reality. And you're saying something to get her to validate and like you. And the only reason you really want the woman is actually because you want, like, you want her valid. This is a weird thing. I noticed this myself, that when I was like, when I go after girls, especially when I was younger, it was more about the idea of getting the girl, because that's a pride thing. And you'd be like, all right, I'll get the girl and it'll be class. And so I pull girls and I bring them like home, almost solely just to be like, yeah, I pulled a girl, and so I could tell the lads or something like that. Or I could even, not even the lads, it was the idea of telling the lad in my head, the boyo in my head, that I am a G, like I've pulled a girl and all that. But over time you start to realize that a lot of those experiences are a little bit hollow. And often the best experiences are ones where you're with a girl that you genuinely vibe with. And in some senses, you can get a very hot girl who you don't really vibe with. She might just be like quite hollow. Not all hot girls. There's some great hot girls, obviously, but and because that's a stereotype, you know. But she can be quite hollow or dumb or facile or something like that. And it could be better to like sacrifice her. It's a sacrifice idea for the sake of you being yourself, because she's so hot, you'll try to put on a front and be like, yeah, well, I'm super hot as well because I'm like a super big G and all this shit. And she's just like, she'll be like, this is disgusting. Like you're trying to prove yourself to me. You're pedestalizing me. And that's all that like fake manipulative stuff. Whereas if you were authentic to yourself and she's so hot, you're so scared of losing her, and then she's starting to say something that you think is stupid, your instinct is like, all right, lie, tell her it's smart so that she likes you, but maybe you should obey that thing that you go and like, that's just dumb, I don't agree with that. And then you will find out the more you vibe with that, the more women will appreciate that real based gravitas of masculine energy where you're being authentic with yourself. And it does come down to that idea of betraying your word for the sake of gaining something like validation versus being yourself. And when you do actually make that sacrifice and become yourself, the amount of power you get is so much more natural and benevolent, and it's an astounding thing. So how women will teach you about God. I'm glad you've arrived, people.
Yeah, this is where also more mental breakdowns might occur. So I was just thinking there, like, in terms, because you might say that the will is all we had. This will of God is what we should be going with. But then again, you wouldn't really have capitalism. You wouldn't really have society. There'd be loads of other things if everyone just going around what their will was saying. Right. But what Jung is implying is there's like a higher will to truth. And it must be in some ways informed by the spirit of culture, that logos making factor which glues us all together, because God is partly an abstraction of that. So you've got to, in order to take this stuff incredibly seriously, and this is so difficult to do, and it's causing me like strain in my own personal life all the time from reading this damn stuff and thinking about it. It's like, what would be the correct way of doing things? Would it be you get those doomsayers on the street who are standing there, everyone hates them, and then they're going, God is going to bring death upon all of you. This is the truth. This is it. This is it. It's like, you can't even be sure that they're telling the authentic truth, because what's their motivation behind it? Is it motivated by a resentment against society? Is it motivated by I'll be rewarded in heaven? What is that real motivation? What's his real truth? So, and the hypothesis here as well is that as you manifest the logos properly, you will become, in a psychic way, stronger and more attractive to other people. This is why Jung was considered in his personal life to be an incredibly electric, magnetic person, just by being around him. So, and just talking about this stuff for the last 20 minutes, it's like it elevates out of the fallen world, and there is some kind of psychic state above it all. There is an extra metaphysical layer to reality where your choices and your words matter. Because if you cuck on your word, if you don't do something you believe to be truthful, then you get weaker and weaker and weaker. And then you start saying things out of resentment and more resentment than that. And then what does that lead you towards? Then you get the ego inflation idea, or the possession by the shadow. And then you stop being in control. So it seems to be that the fundamental fabric of the universe, and I'm a scientist saying this and it makes no sense, but the fundamental fabric of the universe is the truth and the lie. And that's what matters. And that what's true is what the conscience tells you is true. That will of God in your head is true. It's not the objective world. That's like a different type of truth. That's like a fallen world's truth. What's true is true, and what's not true is the lie. And that's why Satan, fundamentally, the idea of evil is deception, the lie. So it's like you make a stand on either good or by evil. by telling the truth in a fundamental manner or by lying for anything else other than what that instinct inside you tells you to do.
And what's so cool about that is that it's a beautiful romantic idea, but put it into practice and you are fucked, because it's not straightforward. Like if you go out there and you start asserting, as we are just casually saying stuff about as I am just casually saying stuff about transgender kids and whatnot, you go magnify that to a large scale, and then you'll start getting hate mobs, you'll start getting the negative stuff. That's when you really get tested. Like what happens now when you're seeing people like the banking cartel around the world is starting to push tech companies to stop content creators like Sargon of Akkad and all that. Apparently that was to do with Visa and MasterCard and whatnot. And what are you going to do when you assert a reality that is counter to the sodomite reality that's going on in the world right now? And they take your money from you, you know? What do you do then? Because it's all easy and nice. On some level, it's hard to get socially shamed and internet hate mobs. But then what happens when they take your ability to eat, your ability to live? What happens when you get ostracized that bad? And the idea is that you can, like, would you be willing to save the tribe if the tribe kicked you out? That's a crazy thought.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it's like Solzhenitsyn was saying that the reason why the Soviet Union was in such a bad place in the first place because everyone kept lying. So then people will come up to you and say, well, like would you, for example, stand up against Stalin and say you're wrong, everything is wrong, and then you get dragged away and no one hears you and it's all futile? It's like, would you do that sincerely? Guarantee, no, you bloody wouldn't. You would go with what's happening. But it's the lie in the first place that got you in that position. So there's hope there. So it's like, we're not there yet. Maybe we will be. I don't know. But if we don't tell the truth, that then happens. That's the hypothesis.
This is where it becomes complicated psychologically, is that can we tell the truth if we do not believe that there's a God watching inside our head? Because if I turn around now and say the gulags start to show up again because the communist ideology starts to take root again, and the gulags show up again, and I know that if I'm to stand up against the gulags, I'm going to be dragged off to a gulag and I will die and no one will ever remember who I was and it will be all futile. So if I look at that pragmatically, how can I make that decision? I can't make that decision. That's too, like, if my psychology thinks there is no God, I won't do that. I will always cook for power or for survival at the very least. Because if I'm like, why make a stand? It's futile. No one will notice and it will mean nothing. Whereas if the idea of that there is a God and he sees inside your head and somehow it will mean something, you're getting a guarantee in an afterlife. That's why that infrastructure works for people psychologically. So that means that you can get ganged up and be like, we'll murder you right now, your entire family, you'll never exist to history. And you'll be like, that's okay because God has seen me and he knows what I'm about to do now. And that's all that matters. And that is unbelievably powerful, because when you have someone with that in their head, you cannot rock them. When they actually believe that, you cannot make them do anything. They can be like, murder me, castigate me, shame me. You will not make me break. And that's exactly what Jesus did. It's astounding when you think about it. They were like, King of the Jews. Look at you now, you pathetic wimp. Look at you now, you're pathetic. We murdered you. If you're so powerful, if you're a God, come down from that cross. And he was like, forgive them, God. Forgive them, because they don't know what they do, because I know you exist and they have lost you. But then it becomes even more complicated, because psychologically, and this is probably the line in the Bible that I don't know what to make about. He was up on the cross, Jesus was, and he was, after committing to this, he was like, God sees me, I am his son, and I'm going to commit to my reality, asserting who I am over the fact that they're going to rip me apart and murder me. But then he's on the cross. This is God's son who knows, with ultimate authority, and he says, Father, why have you abandoned me?
Mm-hmm.
And is that a moment of doubt? And I don't know what to make of that at all. That scares the fuck out of me.
That's a scary line. But then at the end of the day, he rose from the dead and he came back. That's what the churches say anyway, because it's not clear what that means. Jesus came back with the holes in his hands and the people doubted him and he was like, feel them. Now go spread my damn message. And then gone. Now he's going to wait for Judgment Day. So does the whole thing fall apart if Jesus did not rise from the dead? Because in which case, the
Oh.
last thing Jesus said, in which case it turns into the worst. Because I mean, Christianity is a comedy at the end of the day. Strictly speaking, it's a happy ending. Otherwise, it's like, why have you forsaken me, dead? End of the Jesus story. Done. You know, he may have done good in this world, but he done. So does it fall apart if you don't have the resurrection of the body? Is that why that was it a pragmatic thing to make it happy ending? Or did he legitimately, is that also a piece of truth to it?
Well, this is Nietzsche's damning criticism of the Christian story, is that Jesus did technically rise as a mimetic idea, but he died as a genetic idea. And so by consequence, the people who follow Christianity have to overvalue the mimetic spiritual world and undervalue the actual genetic down-to-earth world. And Jung said, this was his criticism of Christianity, is that Christianity is imbalanced because it so heavily values the spiritual world, it doesn't value the physical world. Now, that's true. That's sort of the doctrine that the church has put forward. But that doesn't necessarily exclude the idea of Christ being someone who actually rose from the dead. It's just that people have a hard time believing that. And that doesn't mean it's not true, because crazy things have happened. We don't know what reality is about, what goes on and all that. I don't think the Christian story is as powerful, obviously, if Christ didn't rise from the dead, because that's the ultimate statement of power, of that you can murder me, but you will never murder an idea. And literally, the idea will bring the body back to life, because the idea that you obey, which is God, has the power to bring you back to life. There's that idea in it. I'm still on the fence whether I'm fully all in with that. I don't want to put it out of the realm of possibility. As I said, man, there's crazy things we don't understand. So it's very, very possible. But
what happens when you completely embody the logos? Because exactly. If we're talking about the Jung Aion idea, it's like you get stronger when you tell the truth. What happens if you just tell the truth and then you're willing to die for the truth? What happens? Are you able to transcend this life? Does something happen to yourself and your ego? They unite and then you transcend into another realm? Is that what the resurrection means?
This is what Christianity is even more intense about, is that the prophecy, and I think this is in the book of Matthew when I was reading it, is that at the end of time, all the people who embodied the truth to the maximum extent and were chosen people, were good people, will be resurrected physically.
Yes.
Physically. Their bodies will come back to life. Now how do you get your head around that?
But then it also means that the number of people in heaven would be severely chopped down.
Yeah, dude, the end of times is unbelievably ruthless. Jesus has that quote in the book of Matthew where he says, I come not to bring peace, but to bring sword. And at the end, he comes back and he is slaughtering motherfuckers. Like, he has this crew of virgin boyos that are in a choir, and they're all like, they're all virgins, and they're like his righteous army of some sort. And then they just murder. It's just slaughtering degenerates, man. That's all it is. A load of people end up in hell. It's pretty intense.
Yeah. Okay. So then, and this is happening in both our personal lives, of course. The calling of the will of God. It's like, do we turn Christian? And then obviously the problem is, which Christian? Is it what Jesus said is the only thing that matters, speaking the truth, or do you have to give credence to the other hierarchy of sin, other things that are they're not just speaking the truth, but then is this will of God also within you actions of truth as well? Is like, so all of Christianity condemns fornication. So it's like, is there, if you listen to your instincts hard enough, is there an instinct there? The hypothesis would be yes, saying do not fornicate. Is that there? Is that also important? I don't know. Then it complicates things. And if you go and fornicate, but you've told the truth all your life, do you get heaven? Does that still count? Where's the hierarchy here? That's complicated.
Yeah, no, it is complicated, dude. Jesus, it is. I'm trying to read, like, I don't accept any denominations. I don't trust the Catholic Church. I think it's degenerate. They're full of pedophiles. It's like, fuck it, you know, like, fuck them. I don't like them. So I would stand away from them. The Protestant church is just not my traditional church. I don't mind it. The Orthodox Church in the East, same thing. Like, it's not my traditional church. I wouldn't be against it either, though. I just don't know enough about it. But my fundamental thing, and this has always been who I am, is that I read the source, and I'm reading the Bible just to get to understand the source. And it's a way different story than the way people present it to you. I don't think the Bible is about fornication. I don't think that's a big deal. It's almost like, it seems like the Bible is trying to say that when you as a culture lose God, you start to sodomize. Now, fornicating is not this fucking horrible thing. Like, you can do whatever you want there. But obviously just don't be an idiot about it. But when you lose God, you lose this ability to deify the value of life, which leads to more nihilistic ways of expressing your sexuality. And your sexuality becomes a way of dragging you down into your animalistic nature. And so if you have a healthy relationship to sex, you can probably be quite extravagant in your expression of it, and have a plentiful, abundant appetite for it. But if you have a very, very if sex is the only way you can find meaning in this fallen world, you will start to do very, very fucked up stuff, and that drags you down. And when a whole culture gets caught by this god, this Eros, which is a downward Dionysian force, which gives you gravity to your spirit, or to your character, but also, disintegrates you as well. It's not Apollyon, which raises you up. If you get that downward force, it will cause the culture to fall. And that's like falling from God's grace. God would favor you when you obey him. And to a large extent, that's about having moral standards, or just having an obedience to that moral in your head. And then when that's instigated, things rise up. But then when you lose that, it falls back down again. And
this is the thing, though. I'm not criticizing that. It's just what's then concrete and what's important. And then why is it so important that she's the Virgin Mary, for example? It's like, what about giving to the poor? Have you got to do that? Or is it just speaking the truth? Where's the line? What did Jesus say? It's like, what did he say on Sermon on the Mount, for example? That's a pretty good metric of what you might need to do. And in which case, so the Sodom and Gomorrah thing where God destroyed you, it's like, what the hell does that mean? What specifically were they doing? And it's not clear enough. So it's almost like God's given his message. Maybe there are missing pieces.
Well, this is what I mean. I think it's very, very clear they lost God. The most fundamental thing I can find is that they stopped worshiping him. And that's really what the Bible says, is that, like, all right, all the other stuff is important. His law is obviously important, but the biggest problem is the fundamental faith in him being a real thing that you should worship. And then they start worshiping the Eros, which manifests as whatever pagan god is local to them. Because God, like, all the pagan gods have names like Baal and all that shit. But God himself, I think it might have been Moses, says, "Yo, God, what's your name, man?" And God says, "I am that I am." He doesn't give a name. He just says that I'm in existence. I am being, And then Moses is like, "Right on, brother." And then, like, they write that down as the Tetragrammaton or whatever. And so that's the thing you obey. You obey being, and being has a principled way you must act. There is like, your consciousness connected to this being has this set of principles that you must obey. And if you lose them, if you stop believing in being as having principles of some sort, you end up worshiping the Eros, which makes you up. You betray your logos for your Eros. But when you're worshiping logos, your Eros is contextualized properly, so you don't have to deny it, because that would be too imbalanced. You don't have to deny it. You can really just have a healthy relationship to it. Because I don't believe in, as an artist, I don't believe in this idea of destroying your emotions and throwing them out and getting rid of them. Like, the gods within, they are the stuff of life, but in some sense they can't be deified as ultimate destiny creating realities. You actually do need to lead that up to something more akin to truth. Or, as an artist, for me, it's always been creativity. Can I create something that would impress God? Like, it's always pushing it up there. How can I honor him, his creation, to participate in that dance? Whereas if I was more about, if I lost touch with that, I'd be like, how can I just get as much sex as possible to get me catharsis for this fallen, broken existence that has no meaning?
Possibly it could be. That'll be a very, very different Christianity to what we've actually seen. That'll be more akin to what the Gnostics are talking about. But
no, I don't think so. No. The Gnostics are much different. The Gnostics are proposing that the world itself is evil, an illusion. It's like the Matrix, and
meaning a rejection of all the churches that have existed as such. So you're going back to the base text, and then you'd probably go into some of the Gnostic Gospels too, some of which are absolutely insane. I guess we've got a little bit sidetracked on what's the real true Christianity and how can we save this world, just from one paragraph of Jung. But the key principle, of course, is speaking the truth in the utmost way that you possibly can. You know, I guess that's why free speech is so enshrined in our laws, because if you don't have free speech, then you don't have the logos factor, then it all degenerates into the Eros factor, which again ties it into that. It's another layer of why it's so important. But then of course it comes down to, and then maybe you go into the postmodernist way of thinking. What is true? What to you is actually true? And when you strip away all the stuff that's not, what actually exists at the core of your being that you have to honor? And it's like trying to do that psychically to yourself, more or less, is individuation, and it's incredibly difficult. Like, it's I wouldn't say lack of sleep necessarily with me, but it's like, do I believe that? Is that really true? You know, I just tweeted something out. Is that true? Maybe, mostly, yes, sort of. And then because you've opened Pandora's box with this stuff, and we've obviously got feedback from the audience, and people have been doing this. It's like you then cannot close Pandora's box again. It's like you've now stared as to what truth is in the face, the fundamental reality. You can ignore it, but it's always there, and it will never, ever, ever leave you alone. And that messes me up, man. Completely messes me up.
It is a profound consequence. I guess I think it is about authenticity. I think when people get caught up in the truth, they think it needs to be like logically consistent, and that throws them a lot. Because my understanding of the individuation process, and from me actually doing what Jung says, like I think I am a little bit different now than most people who get into this stuff, and the fact that I read the books and then I find what Jung says. All right, this is what you got to do, and then I try to put it into practice. My work with dream reading and my work with psychological development has always led me to the conclusion that it's more about emotional integrity, and that you actually got to go among the gods within and play with them and understand what your fear is trying to say and understand what your anger is trying to say. And in any moment, your best message will be delivered when you're connecting to one of those gods and allowing them to release, because that is the logos in some sense. It's more about being authentic to who you are. And yeah, like, you know, it's quite pop psychology if you ask me. And when people are talking about the logos, when you move it to more intense stuff, then the idea of hills to die on and whatnot, you know in yourself that you don't like the way the world's going, and you can't really put your finger on it. And if I was to ask you, don't speak out unless you know the truth, which means that you've got to somehow, you know, gather all the evidence and construct an integral argument about the way the world is going. That's a big thing to ask on someone who's, you know, just a farmer who doesn't have time to fucking like wallow through the internet all the time. But can you turn around to them and say, man, if you notice that shit's going a bit weird, and a lot of people are coming in trying to violate your moral sensibilities and telling you to do things that like are almost upside down. They're trying to make the world a weirder place. You know, they're trying to cut your, you know, do shit with your kids and all that stuff, you know. That triggers something in them, and it's like obey that instinct to an extent. You don't know how far that could go if you obey it.
Yeah, let me know what you think about this, because I was trying to think about how to best get in contact with the will of God and what actually you should do. So what did Jesus do before he was arrested? He went to the Garden of Gethsemane and he was praying, and he's like, what should I do? And God was like, die. He's like, okay, fine. And it's the same thing with Socrates, where he was about to die. He knew he was going to die. So he went and he consulted his daemon, and he was like, should I leave? I have the ability to escape. They don't have to kill me. I've done nothing wrong. And the daemon was like, no, stay and die. So it's like, that's interesting. It's something in your head. I go to church I try and go almost every single day just to go into a church. And inside this church, there are like murals of Catholic martyrs, which the image of martyrs really hits me, because that's what we're talking about here. So it's got like Thomas More on the wall with this lovely axe going into the back of his head, and it goes, Martyr Thomas More. So I like sit next to him, and I'll close my eyes, have a little pray. It's also very difficult to know what a pray is. And I like close my eyes, feeling all stressed or whatever, because life's bullshit, etc. And then I'm just like, will you tell me what to do? Like, there must be something I can do that will help with this. And if I do it intensely enough, so I feel, maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I feel that it's almost like I'm straining. There's like a level of strain coming forth. And then occasionally a couple of colors will like appear in front of me. But what I get phenomenologically is this sense of peace. And it's like all the stress, all the urges for addictions, we'll say cigarette addiction, because I'm battling with that, all of them disappear. And it's like, what you need to do is just have faith in me. It's always the thing that keeps coming up. It's like, I love you. The one thing you need to focus on is your relationship with me. the relationship with truth. And then it makes me feel so much better. And then I come out and I'm like, why was I stressed about that? I'm just going to go do what I have to do and everything's okay. So it's like, is that the will of God that's talking about? To sit and actually pray? And it's like Catholic meditation. This is why Padre Pio was apparently able to fucking teleport all over the place. Like the dude was a strange man, that he was so into meditation. Like he used to just sit there for hours and meditate. And that apparently gave him his magical powers. But there's something weird there. It's like listening to what your psyche is actually telling you to do. And it will take away, it will just give you peace. Being with God is like a sense of peace. Is that the will of God? Praying and seeing what it says.
I will tell you the story as I understand it about Christ. He was in that garden and you know the scene from Passion of the Christ. He says to the disciples, "Fuck off there and don't fall asleep." And then they all fall asleep. He's like, "What the fuck?" And so he goes off and he goes into the darkness where Satan is hanging around in the fringes, and he gets down and he's like, "God, this cup of suffering is going to be immense," because he knows that he's about to get tortured and ripped apart and killed. And he's like, "This is going to be horrible. Please don't make me have to go through with this." Jesus says this as well. Please don't make me have to go through this. But if this is if this is the way that you have to have things happen, I'm okay with it. But please, if this cup of suffering can be passed on somehow, please. He begs, man. He says, please don't make it hurt so much. But if this is the way it has to work, I'm all in. That's so strange, man. Because that is, I think Jesus represents the conflict in your own psyche that you go through when you're confronting the truth. Because there is another layer to this, and this is where the Christian story becomes very difficult, is that Jesus is ultimately murdered by the religious authorities at the time, the Pharisees, who were the Jewish elites at the time. And they were a very rich country, and they had a very dogmatic religion. That's the only way they could survive all the wars that were going on around the time. And they represent the socially accepted norm. Is it called the octave window or something like that?
Something like that.
And that's the way that the world is. That's the up and down in the world. And that was the up and down in Jesus's world. They said what was up, and they said this is how the crack goes. But he knew that they were wrong. They were misinterpreting the Gospels. It's the same way as you can say the church is, or even the modern world is constructed by the people who are leading us have got a negative view, but they've got all the power. And so you know that you've got to turn around and say, "Look, guys, I disagree with everything you're doing." And if you're going to gain any amount of influence, that disagreement is going to turn into proper animosity, and they are going to kill you. And they're not just going to kill you, but they're going to publicly make a statement about you. They're going to use your body to destroy you. Gaddafi is a good example. He was he took his whole country off the gold, off the fiat currency, and put them back in the gold standard to stabilize their currency. And he tried to make a Bank of Africa. And then, of course, the banking cartels all heard about this and got involved, the American state and all that. And Gaddafi ended up getting a bayonet shoved up his arse, and he was rammed down a street, made a fool of, while his country was bombed all around him. And Libya was a beautiful city before that. It was one of the richest places in Africa. But on some level, he didn't cook. He was like, I'm gonna stand by my word nonetheless. And how much are you able to do that? Like, what goes on in your head when you're confronting that real big boy decision of being like, there is no way out. This is not have a happy ending. And this is fundamentally it, is that like you get caught up in this infantile fantasy that your life is going to have a happy ending, where you're going to like bang all the bitches and then go get married in the sunlight, and then the kingdom's going to be fine. But there are a lot of people in the world who have to have a negative ending to their life. They have to have a tragedy. It has to end with death. Their destiny is fundamentally a moot point. It's like the insect that gets stomped on. It's like your life meant nothing. You got crushed. You weren't powerful enough, and you attract that energy. But then you ask yourself, I'm going to suffer for something now, and it's going to be horrible. I could just scamper off and try carve out a measly living. It's like that idea in Braveheart where he's like, what would you do without freedom? Would you fight? And it's that idea of you will sacrifice an ideal for the sake of living just a bit longer, but do you really have a life at all? And so you ask yourself, am I willing to suffer for something idealistic? And God is that fundamental ideal. The God is the idea of the good kingdom, I guess you could say. And Jesus does ask that. He's like, whatever you, God, goodness, the good kingdom need me to do, I will do. But my God, it's going to hurt. Please don't make it hurt so much. And God is like, I'm sorry, brother, but this is how it has to work. Actually, God doesn't even reassure him. God is just like almost no answer. And in many ways, this is what's weird about it, is God doesn't give answers, which makes it very hard to believe in him. Instead, they say that God does this thing where he can give you strength. He gives you Eros. He gives you the Holy Spirit. God is in control of the pagan gods, and so he will fill you up with Eros when you need it, but you will never get a clear answer from him. And the only answers you get seem to be in like scripture. This is what the whole Old Testament and New Testament is about, is the idea of the prophecies leading the path, and then people appealing to God for energy, but very rarely getting a direct communication with him. And so my answer to that would be, I don't know. It's tough, man. It's tough to know what's going on, but it seems to be the psychological conflict of making a big boy decision, being like, I will die for something. I will die either, and will I be able to take on the suffering? Will I have the integrity to stay suffering through the hardship? It's a very hard thought.
I always found it interesting that Christians, like proper in-depth Christians who have, they walk with God every day. You talk to them and then they'll say, Jesus died for our sins. That's the thing that comes up all the time. It's like a mimetic idea. Jesus died for us. He gave his life, and God gave his only son for us. And then some of them start weeping. So I've seen this on YouTube a million times. Then they always get up and start speaking in tongues, which is an amazing experience. But it's always great fun. I love the evangelists, by the way, because Catholics are so boring, and I'm a Catholic boy technically by heritage. The evangelists in the churches, when the churches aren't even on, they're just praise the Lord Jesus now. It's like I quite like that. It's good energy. But it's like Jesus died for us. What the hell does that mean? It's like, what would the world be like if Jesus had not made his sacrifice? What would it be like? Would it be what we have now? So in many ways, his sacrifice, even if it didn't benefit him in any way, he did die for us. Because all of Western civilization is predicated on his sacrifice, his death, and resurrection. So everything in the current world is based on that.
And I've thought about this a lot, because Norse mythology is a big deal nowadays. And Norse mythology has a very integral version of the Christ myth. It has Odin hanging on the world tree for the sake of magic, of gaining knowledge, of gaining the runes. It comes down to destiny. These concepts all boil around and circle around the idea of destiny and knowing the future and knowing how to defeat death and whatnot. And Odin is almost like that Faustian spirit, as they say, within Western man, where they're like, okay, God is dead. This is the Nietzsche idea. God is dead. He's not coming to save us. We're never going to get saved. We can't just keep submitting our will to this God idea. What we need to do is take science, figure out immortality, conquer space, and live forever and become ubermensch. And that is that fundamental Norse Faustian Odin spirit, is that idea of staring into the well of destiny and seeing the way the world works, the truth that makes up the world, which is the fundamental information-based principles, which are represented as the magical runes. And then you take those and you use them to change your destiny. You rewrite your destiny. But there is something very strange. And so I imagine if Christianity never showed up, it would have just been a load of pagan tribes competing with a very similar way of looking at the world as this. Christianity is very different in that it asserts a submission to God's destiny, God's ability to guarantee destiny, as opposed to these more pagan ones, which are about finding your own way. And yeah, so the Norse ones, in many senses, we'd be following something like that, where we would be seeking to achieve it ourselves. It would be Luciferian in that sense. And I'm as I said, I've got a conflict in me. I don't know, is that wrong still? And our world is predicated on starting to accept that journey of getting in touch with that Faustian soul and leading ourselves out of the ignorance of the past towards the benevolent future of the tech utopias and whatnot. And like that's a hard argument to argue against, because since the Enlightenment, life has got better, like we're able to have this conversation. It's not like we're going to suffer for food and all that, but there is a spiritual death in the modern world as well. And so there's a balance going with that. And then the other problem with add on top of the paganism thing is that the gods that exist are almost always tribal, and they come out of a people. And so the gods that win are almost always connected to a tribe of sorts, whereas Christianity seems more universal. So I don't know how to resolve that. I don't know what the world would be like without it, my man. I don't know.
Well, the resolution to that, I think, is where do these people get their values from? Where are the values? Because all the values we live on right now are the coattails of Christianity.
Oh, well, the values...
what does that utopia look like? Do you still have a spark of divinity within you, or can we suppress you for the good of the group?
The scientific utopia, I'm not sure, because it doesn't have any values. Values are all relative, but
and that becomes a big problem. That becomes an absolutely huge problem because
I had to sneeze.
Because how am I meant to treat you, and how are you meant to treat me? What is your life worth? Because then eventually you end up in the Marxist places. That's why science and Marxism seems to overlap heavily for no real reason. But one in 5 professors are Marxists.
Yeah.
That's weird. Why that? Why is that the alternative? So it's not as simple as tech utopia, where we all go and look after each other, and because that's not implicit in the tech utopia. It's just we get to move somewhere up above the fallen world. We have a little bit of less suffering sometimes, but there's no actual end goal of destiny and savior. We know the Übermensch is a wrong idea, thanks to Jung. So what is the real game there? Is it to save us all? I don't think so.
The game is it's racial fundamentally. So if we break out of the Christian thing and get into the idea of Norse, and let's steelman them here, and we're saying we're going to get into the idea of Norse mythology. So first of all, if you have a Norse mythology, you have values. You have very strong family values. You have a very strong sense of honor, duty, and all of that stuff is like you've got strong values in place, but it's very much based on blood. Christianity allows you to transcend blood quite well. So Norse mythology is valid and valuable in that sense. It keeps tribes together, but it doesn't scale well, if you know what I mean. Pagan mythologies don't scale well because they always become a clash of gods. You always come up with the Irish gods and the Scandinavian gods would always have to clash each other and be like, well, which image is going to be right? It's the war of the gods, and so people would fight over that. So that's a problem, of course. So what are you going to do? You're going to choose a Roman pantheon that dominates the entirety of Europe and then imposes the Roman pantheon upon the Europeans. Like maybe something like that will happen. But then when you get into the idea of the scientific one and the Übermensch, if that's hollow and there is no sense of gods in that, and what you're doing is you're looking for the Übermensch, which is the new god, this becomes racial as well, because then the god of the Übermensch is the highest version of human. It's beyond human. And so we're imagining a god for a new tribe, which is the superhumans. And that comes to a point where the superhumans we will create them, and then they will turn around and destroy us if we're not valuable, or enslave us if we are, and probably just not be nice to us, because what will matter is them and their gods. And the Übermensch, as Nietzsche said, is not a god of compassion. Nietzsche has an unbelievably intense quote where he says, the great man will be willing to sacrifice himself for his ideal and all of humanity with it. And that's and when you strip it out and really think it through, that's actually the only way it can go. It has to be like, all right, our tech utopia needs to create a new type of person, and anybody who doesn't is left behind, and they're destroyed. They have to be, because they're just sort of a cancer on the planet type thing. And that's, you see all these memes coming up, man. Humans are a parasite, a cancer on the planet. And so, Bill Gates and all them, they're all freaking out about overpopulation. And that's all to do with the ideology of there is no God. We're here on the earth. We need to create a Superman, the next evolutionary step beyond humanity. And that next evolutionary step will have a new pantheon of gods. And those gods will be for the Supermen. And they will dominate like the way Rome dominated Europe and put everybody under the yoke. And then we'll move on from there. And probably a lot of people will end up dead and enslaved because of that. And it's a dark vision, but I just don't see how mimetically it could work out any other way. Like when you get people like Sam Harris being like, compassion, you're just like, Jesus, Marx said the same thing, dude. Like, no, just no, man. It's like, if you don't have compassion, if you don't have empathy, we will have to kill you because you're not superhuman.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. So, yeah, I guess Christ or Satan, which one are you going to follow, right?
Well, that was exactly my conflict in that video I made a while ago. I was like, I don't know which to do, mate. I don't know which to do. Here, let's dig into this book a bit more because we're starting to run out of time.
Cool. The hell did we get to?
We were in.
Where did we get to?
Oh, we were at. I'll go. But the inner authority does not need to be consulted first, as it is presented at the outset of the intensity of the tendencies struggling. The inner authority does. I'm so dyslexic. The inner authority does not need to be consulted first, as it is present at the outset of the intensity of the tendencies struggling for decision. In this struggle, the individual is never a spectator, only he takes part in it more or less voluntarily, and tries to throw the weight of his feeling of moral freedom into the scales of decision. Nevertheless, it remains a matter of doubt how much his seemingly free decision has a casual and possibly unconscious motivation. This may be quite as much as an act of God as in any natural cataclysm. The problem seems to be, to me, unanswerable because we do not know where the roots of the feeling of moral freedom lie, and yet they exist no less surely than the instincts which are felt as compelling forces. Jimmy Boyle.
The first thing that's in there is that God is always with you, which is very interesting. Whether or not you believe it or not, God will always be there with you. It does not need to be consulted first. It's completely and utterly always there. So basically, he's continuing on with what we were just saying before. We sort of extrapolated and covered what he's already said, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. There is a little bit of a note about free will that I'd like to touch on briefly. And it is that idea that I'm trying to conceptualize, where you have the Eros feelings, your desire for sex and your desire for violence and status and winning and all that stuff, and your desire to capture the emotions and the grandeur of life and all that. And then you have the higher or maybe a different instinct, which is this weird conscience you have, which wants you to say or act truthfully, and when you don't, it fills you full of shame. There's that instinct as well, and I guess the monotheistic religions are about deifying that instinct above the other instincts, which are considered pagan, Eros, lower instincts. Jung is sort of asserting that these things don't. It's you can't just get rid of paganism. It's there. It's part of who you are, but the higher thing is still worth valuing immensely because it is probably the most important thing because it controls all the other ones. But then the question becomes, each of these things present you a destiny. The truth, following the truth, presents you this idea of probably leading down Jesus's path, where you'll get castigated, ostracized, and you'll probably have a very, very tragic ending to your life. Whereas, or it won't. You'll have a brilliant, fulfilled life. You don't know, but it's that risk. The destiny of your emotions, of your Eros emotions. If you're really into violence, you'll probably end up in a violent situation. It's like live by the sword, die by the sword. And it's the same with the idea of sex. It's like that sexual behavior will erode your ability to be the moral person you are if you don't control it, if you don't contextualize it properly. And so what happens with all that stuff? And these things all matter. These are all destinies individual to you, and whichever God you worship will lead you in that direction. And so, on some sense, you think that you have this free will thing, which is your ability to choose what you make decisions in your life. And Jung is pretty much bypassing that whole argument. He's flipping the frame, saying you don't make decisions, man. You choose which God you obey.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
And that's an astounding idea because choosing which God you obey is something that you can spend a bit of time and then instigate it as a habit. And then after that, you're led in a different way. And you see this with people because people's morals dictate how they vote, for example. It's like, how do you vote? It's like, I vote conservative, I vote Republican, I vote liberal, I vote Democrat. And it's never really on the person's policies. Like even the presentation of the policies is like, these are my policies. And that's like saying, these are the list of morals. These are the gods I worship in some sense. And so whichever God you've pre-decided will determine how you act. Making rational decisions is so difficult and so complicated that humans have not adapted to do it. And people would see like, we need to be like, Sam Harris is like, we need to be more rational, guys. Maybe we don't. Maybe being rational is something that you use to find the gods, get in touch with how you see the world, and then you can make sort of sub-rational decisions quite effectively after that. It's a very interesting idea. And so if you deify free will and rationality too much, you think that you have to think through every decision. And that leads you into like the sort of analysis paralysis, weird situation where you're overthinking things, when in essence you just need to believe in principles. And these principles would be like, do I believe in the goodness of life? Can I be guided by my intuitive emotions, such as my shame towards not telling the truth, as opposed to over rationalizing about what is truth and all that stuff? And that becomes a very interesting thing, because it frames free will as a much more accurate tool, which is your ability to choose between forces as opposed to your ability to decide everything. So yes, my thoughts there.
Yeah, there's like 50 different paths that have just opened up, which is it's so difficult because, okay, I completely agree with that conception of free will. That's obvious. So we'll say Hermes, the messenger god, comes down and he opens up things for you. You say that's a path, that's a path, that's a path. But then all those paths are dictated by a particular emotional weight. Or you might want to go over there because it'll make you feel good, or it might go there because it make you look good, or it might be there because you feel like you should. Something like that. So every choice that you have will have a god associated with it. But then it also becomes a problem, because if it's not so much the free will issue, it's like, if there is a God surrounding each and everything, how do you know which one is the true God? Because you might say, just take the sex one, for example, just because it's such a big deal. It's such a point of contention within Christianity, we'll say. It's like, one of your instincts will tell you to go and fornicate, like a dirty degenerate. Go and fornicate over there, just because it's good fun.
Over there.
Go fornicate all over the public, yes. And but then if you want to stick to what the Catholic Church has told you, that's not what the will of God is telling you. That's what the Catholic Church has told you. So then you have to, so every single decision, if you think too heavily about it, cripples you. And you have to sit and pass through, be like, so what is really my conscience saying? Because then because your ego will start rationalizing things constantly. So it's like, which one am I going to follow? So it seems to be that the fundamental truth of the God that Jung is putting forward, the self, is do what your conscience tells you to do. Everything else you can put aside as like not important. You can brush it away. It's like, do what your conscience tells you to do. Or else you're worshipping a pagan god. Or else you're doing the Übermensch route. Or else you're just being some kind of, you're just following the animalistic parts of you. The god of sex, for example, or Dionysus if you want to go get drunk for no reason. So, but you'll always have that instinct to go and do the right thing. And it's like, that's incredibly powerful. That's incredibly powerful. And it also gives your life a sense of peace, because you're not alone anymore. It's like you're no longer an ego going down your nihilistic journey through life, which might then cripple you as well. It's now God is always with me and he's always talking to me. The Holy Spirit or Jesus is always on my shoulder. When I was growing up, I don't even think this is Catholic doctrine, but my mum used to say to me, James, there is a good angel on one of your shoulders and there's a bad angel on the other. And every choice you come up against, one of them, they'll be telling you two different things. And always remember to listen to the good angel. It's that idea. You're never alone. And Jungian psychology tells you are never alone. There's always something with you. And you have to have faith that what the Christian God wants is good. It might not be best for you, but it's what's good. And so do you follow that because it's the will of God and that you want to honor God? In which case, why do you want to honor God? Are you doing it because you feel like you should? Are you doing it because otherwise you're afraid society is going to crumble? Are you doing it because two boyos told you to do it on the internet? Because then you really have to start passing it apart as to what that will is telling you to do. And that's so hard.
I don't think it's okay. Two things. There's a lot of stuff here. People, we will probably wrap it up after this. So we're going to have a tirade now. Questions. Pop your questions in that chat and we will answer questions. So pop them in there in that chat. We will pop to them afterwards and we will riff some of them off. And then we'll have to say a fine good day to all you boyos and sweet women. But to get to this idea of the Christian God and what the Christian God means. As I said, the story of the Bible, when you read the Bible, when you just don't listen to what people told you about Christianity and you read the book and you understand what the book is trying to say, the book is trying to tell you that the people collectively who worshipped God, which is the guy who says, I am what I am. So it's just like, I'm reality. The guy who is the real one. He says, when you worship me and you obey me, and I have a set of laws that if you just try not to break these laws, trust me, you'll be all right. Stick with them. Don't be adulterous, don't be Don't be murdering people, all that stuff. Don't be stealing. Don't be doing that stuff. When a group of people get together with these morals, and the Romans had this too. They had the momentous, no, the Moors, the Roman Moors. These were a set of principles that made up the spine of the Roman people. And they actually, their civilization began to crumble when they lost this, apparently, which is very interesting. So that was their version of this. And the Christian one just made it seem to, that the Bible just seemed to have made it more overt and written, so people were just easier able to obey them. When you obey that, what happens is around you, the kingdom, is the individualism idea. You obey these laws and you build yourself to the maximum extent in the image of God, if you will. And then what happens is that extends to your community and that extends to your society. And then around you, a kingdom forms. And then when you go away from that, the kingdom collapses. So saying that you believe in the Christian God is essentially saying that you believe in the idea of a good kingdom, and a good kingdom is a good thing. And when you strip that away, and you say, I don't believe in the good kingdom, or I believe in my own good kingdom, you're essentially saying no to the idea of faith in obeying his structure, his mores, as creating the noble kingdom. And then you go into this idea of rationalizing your own kingdom, and your destiny changes to some extent. And that rationalization always purity spirals into something akin to Marx, where you're like, all right, men will create the good kingdom, and then you elect some people, and the corruption of power always works out, and then bang, you've suddenly got like tyrants on top of your shit and whatnot. Now, that's getting involved with that archetype of the kingdom. It's getting involved with that big archetype of what goes on with that last level stage, and that seems to be possessed. All the gods in the past and in the Bible were over cities, you know, like Jerusalem had Yahweh, I believe, and all these cities would have a god that watches over them, and that's representative of the behaviors that the people living in that city would obey. And even Christ, when he was doing his ministry, would often condemn whole cities at a time. Sodom and Gomorrah was a condemnation of a whole city. It's like they started worshiping a god, and then this god was hanging over the city or something like that. And so the complex philosophical question people are asking when they're saying, go again, like the Christian God is dead, is that we need to now choose a new God, a new set of morals that we worship for the future kingdom of humanity. And in order to do that, we need to properly conceive of him. And we haven't done that yet. So what's happened is we've had Marxism. That's one thing that went in. Another one was we defaulted back into National Socialism. That was another one. That was a racial based one. So that was going back into the idea of the tribe. And all these things are starting to fall back into place. We're starting to find gods again. But we're trying to replace, as Nietzsche, it's exactly what Nietzsche said, we're trying to replace that hidden image of the God. The question is, are we going to reawaken the idea of the Christian God again? That's what's going to happen? Is that what's going to happen? And that's going to be the thing that brings us into the future? Or will it be a situation of the Übermensch, where we get in touch with that Norse, Odin, Faustian spirit, and we end up leading ourselves into like a new tribe of intense people? Or will it be we create artificial intelligence which is able to comprehend the complexity that our minds can't do, and make a truly rational decision about how to lead the future? And that will come down to something like perhaps kill off quite a lot of humans, nonetheless keep the good ones, and then we'll have like an AI god of sorts. And so people are, when you look at the highest levels and the dreams that are possessing people's minds, they're all looking to replace that god so they can build a kingdom underneath it. They're all looking to raise the kingdom up out of the fallen world and whatnot. And that would be my spin on that, sir. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so one of the 10 commandments, of course, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And if you put that in a Jungian lens, it's like within this free will idea, it's like, if you don't do what I say, what my will says, then you're breaking the first commandment, because everything else is having a false god. And it's like, that's mad. So it's like, it's not as in, and this is where it comes into our times as well, where we can say, well, gods don't exist. It's like, yes, they do. This is why it's how you act is what matters, not just what you say. It's that action of saying, I believe in God, rather than the words itself, if you know what I mean. Because if you don't, and if you don't follow what God's laws are, then you are worshipping another God. So it's like, I think that's commandment number one. The most important thing is like me, or else you're doomed, fundamentally. I think I think we should close up.
Yeah, sure. I think that's why people hate Christianity and the Bible so much, is that the main character, God, is pretty. He's pretty like, yeah, he's pretty stubborn. He's like, I am literally the only way out of this game because I am the man who made the game. Like
Yeah.
I put the firmament over the beautiful flat Earth. Like I did it, you motherfuckers. And if you disobey me, I will fuck you up like you will not believe. You think fucking people in the ass is fun? Wait until you get fucked in the ass by like the Assyrians or something like that. And and he says this is a strict set of rules and they're there in the book and you obey them and they work. And people are like, disgusting. I hate rules. Fucking rules. Rules are always a sign of slavery. Which is so interesting because then you go into anti-responsibility ideologies like Marxism, where it's like the rules are wrong. Let's create a new society based on people being more free. And what happens is they end up as actual slaves. It's astounding.
Yeah. Yes.
It's astounding. So your attempt to get free from God, your inability to submit to his what he asserts is reality, ends up you imprisoned. It's very strange, man. It's very strange. But then I don't know. I don't know how to balance that with the paganism still when you're getting into the idea of Odin and all that stuff. I'm still not there. But nonetheless, let's do the questions and we will bounce.
Let's just say that they're all false gods and that the Christian God is the one true God, and all the pagans find somewhere else to go. The power of Christ compel you, sinner, sinner, sinner.
Fucking Puritans here. I'm smelling Oliver Cromwell over all my Irish instincts are like, get this fucking motherfucker out of there.
I'm not the biggest fan of Cromwell either, to be honest with you. The Puritans were fucking weirdos.
Yeah. Pumped. Have to change the number. Thanks, bro. Yeah, I got warned that I got the number wrong because I don't know my Roman very well. Oh man, three-way. Lovecraft gods are the only real gods. Christianity has one God, the Son. Does Christianity go monotheistic with the shadows? That was another criticism. Jung asserted that Christianity is too one-dimensional in its inability to conceptualize the variety of other different experiences, such as the feminine realm of the Eros, because Christianity could never assert a good conception of the pagan gods that people worship before, which were the Eros gods. It always had to adopt the pagan gods and turn them into angels or something. In Ireland, one of our most revered representations of the Holy Spirit was the previous pagan god Bridget of the inspiration. And so this is it's Jung is asserting, but see, I don't think Jung is criticizing Christianity, because when you read the fucking Bible, man, like when you read the Bible, you gotta decondition yourself to everything people have told you about Christianity. What I'm getting super suspicious about is people tell you not to read the Bible nowadays. Now that's insane, because the Bible is they tell you it's a Jewish book. First of all, it's not about Jews. I think Jews are probably 5% of the people in that book. It's the majority of that book is about people like Hebrews and Egyptians, and even the Romans and the Greeks are in it quite a bit. So it's a completely different thing than you get. It's more like it's a set of stories, like, you know, it doesn't tell you about how to set up religion and how the religion should work. And the Catholic Church and all these interpretations of this book have been very, 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 they're not in any way similar to what the book is. And the book doesn't assert a comprehensive psychological scheme. The book just asserts that this is what happened. That's all it says. And from that, you can derive a religion, if you will. And this causes a problem. And this is what happened when the Protestant Revolution happened. At first, you got the Anabaptists and all these crazy bastards. Martin Luther translates the Bible into the vernacular. Everybody starts reading the Bible and being like, wait a second. The Catholic Church isn't telling me what's going on at all. I can interpret this yoke any way I want to. And so everybody started coming up with these cults, and then all of a sudden Germany was like riots and people taking over cities, and like the Anabaptists, for example, took over a city from a prince, and the prince was super pissed about it. And then one of the people and the leader of the cult worked his way up to the top of the society and started this like polygamy situation where the city was getting sieged from the outside by this prince, but then this guy was up at the top taking 90% of the resources and all the girls and just having sex with them, and then all the other people were like starving and started to betray him. And so crazy shit like this happens, you know. It was a similar death of God situation. But that all comes to the idea of interpretation and the idea of how you get your spin off the religion. And when you read the Bible, it doesn't tell you how to interpret the psychological reality of what Christianity means. It simply says a guy showed up and he died for the truth, which was that he was God's son. And the people who were part of his culture, the Jewish Pharisees, murdered him. And so this is what happened. This is a historical document. And then he had a couple of disciples who got oppressed by these Jewish Pharisees. They went to Rome, and then they built a religion out of that. And there was this will to create a church. And they never said what the church should be like. They never said any of that stuff. It's just all about this is the story. And so the idea that our modern Christianity is the fundamental doctrine itself is a problem, because it's not. It's like it's just like a book, and then we've got this perspective, which is our Catholic, our education system, our Protestantism, our Orthodoxy, whatever, our interpretations of it. But the book is different, and so we are still in this problem now where we perhaps need to learn how to interpret it. And it's hard to know what to do about that. That's a very complicated problem, because especially in an era when God is dead, reinterpreting something that is considered essentially blasphemy, like the idea of bringing the Bible into a scientific institution, is the blasphemy that the people who used to bash the Bible used to talk about. So it's a weird situation to be in. James, any thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I agree with you, but I also don't think it's necessarily as simple as perhaps it comes across. Because, for example, Jesus did miracles, and we don't know what the hell to do about that. Jesus also talked about Adam. So it's like, did Jesus have a copy of the book of Genesis and he wrote it? Or was it a colloquial different version of Adam? Did Adam really exist? Did Abraham really exist? Did Jacob really exist? Did Moses really exist? We don't know. And so which of those books that happen to be in the Bible are canonical and should be taken seriously? Because
I think
take those, and then what else?
I think this comes to a simple conclusion. I think we hit a simple conclusion, though, with this, is that you either believe the book or you don't. Like, are you going to believe someone telling you what this book means? They're like, oh, it doesn't really mean that.
Which book, though? Because the Bible is a collection of books.
Well, you've got the Torah, which is the 5 books written by Moses, apparently. That's the start. That sets up the premise. And then you've got the New Testament. You've got the prophets in between, but you don't need to take them that serious. But at the same time, they're quite valuable. And but the main part is the start, the Torah, and then the New Testament. And then after that, the other things are kind of like filler. They're very, very valuable and interesting books. They give you a lot of historical context, and they explain the messianic process. But you get the prophecy in Genesis chapter 6, when God says, I shall send down my son, and all that stuff. So it's there. That stuff matters. And the New Testament concludes it. But you could probably read the book of Matthew and the Torah, the first 5 books, and get pretty far.
Yeah, so then what about people like, well, we'll say St. Paul? What about the book of Revelation? What about the Gnostic Gospels? Because then if you undermine, this is the problem, of course, if you undermine the Catholic Church and the way that they put forward the Bible as such, then you have a problem of actually which one of these are true. And why is it specifically the book of Matthew, for example? And obviously I'm not going full postmodern on this, but it does pose a problem. It's like, oh yeah. It's so, for example, my fiance, good Catholic Irish girl, she in religious education had to do the Old Testament as a thing, all of it. So she'll come up to me and be like, oh, I didn't really like Ezekiel very much, but I did like this one very much, but it's all taken as real. And then in which case, how do you know which ones are real and which ones to take seriously?
Well, there's levels to this, like you can, for example, the idea here is you're not taking necessarily which books do I take serious, but you're trying to get a sense of the story, I imagine. I don't see why you should, like, you can base yourself in the Torah, and the Torah seems to be pretty stringently, it's a decent book to read anyway. Now, the problem is that if you're going to accept the Torah on merit, then you have to believe the earth's flat. That's the only thing, because it says that at the very start. You have to believe there's a Garden of Eden. You have to believe all that stuff. But after that, it proves to be quite a...
Believe that. Did Jesus believe in an actual Garden of Eden? Because then it becomes, because then you're saying it's like a historical fact that's put forward. It's like what's true and what's metaphorically true. So it's not quite as simple as I just read the book of Matthew and do what it says.
But are we really in a position to say, all right, so Jesus is, if all those stories were metaphorically true, like surely Jesus is just metaphorically true then as well?
Yeah. So which ones are really true?
And then you're getting into a point where it's like, oh, none of it's true.
Yeah. So what the hell do you do about that? So either you take it all or you don't. And then but you're saying that and I also agree with you, the Catholic authority is not necessarily canonical. So I don't see how Jesus saying, Peter, you are my rock, go and build my church, means go to Italy and create the Vatican, and then whatever the Pope says is infallible. That's not there at all. So we know that that's silly. We'll say that's definitely silly. But what then? You know, what's definitely canonically real?
This is what I'm saying, is that, like, I guess it comes down to those really big questions. Is like, did Jesus live? And you're gonna have to say yes if you're going to be a Christian. Of course he lived. Did he come back to life after the death? So you get a sense of the story. You have it's quite clear what he said. Like Matthew, Luke, those they cross-reference. You get a very clear picture of what he said and all that stuff. And so you base yourself in that idea. And so then you abstract out of that. All right, this is the story. This is it. It's just a story. And the problem is that the more you add more books on top of that, the more you get into stuff like the Jewish Talmud, which is just literally a commentary on all this stuff from people over and back, and they're creating a religion. They're doing what we're essentially doing now. They create a religion based off these first principles. And I guess what I'm saying is that if you want to really get to the money, don't be listening to the people who are creating religions and using like stuff like the Talmud, or even, we don't know how much the Bible was manipulated. Don't be listening to that stuff. Go back to the source and figure it out for yourself. But of course, people don't have the luxury of doing that. So that's why things like the Catholic Church existed, is because they were bringing people in and saying, look, we know you're just a farmer and you can't spend all your time reading this fucking book. So we'll tell you what it means. And it was generally benevolent. But now we're in a new point where we are in a postmodern reality where it's like, read the fucking book and figure out for yourself. And people are doing it now more, and they're being like, oh shit, there's something to this. Like, it's a very reliable historical document at the very least. And Jesus was written in independent Roman sources as well. So he definitely lived. And so we've got just a couple of problems there. It's like, how do we interpret that story? Do we derive a religion from that? That's where it becomes complicated. Do we derive a religion from that? But these are all big questions. These are all big questions. And the fundamental big question is the assertion of the Bible that there is a God, and if you disobey him, you will get smashed. And so how do you make sense of that? And my spin is that the Christian church didn't conceptualize people's psychology sufficiently, especially in the modern world. And so it may be a rebirth of some type of meta religion coming, but or it could be a rebirth of Christianity. I don't know. Something's happening anyway.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is we need to go through the Bible and see what's true and what's not true, and then we can be the creators of this new sort of pseudo religion.
Jesus, I'd be careful there, but
no. Could you imagine the way of the boyo religion? And it's just a bunch of virgin Christian chads running around being boys.
Or we'd very quickly just turn into a load of terrorists, man. I don't know.
to be fair, I can see that energy as a risk. I definitely can.
Yeah. And we have a comment here. Sodomy, my arse, quote, Father Ted. I guess that's why the Bible has so many versions recorded. Towel on head adds gravitas. The logos, loving that. Borderline is logo. Borderline disorder is to logos as bipolar is to Eros. Interesting. You don't even say 99 of what you say. You know what you say after you say it. We don't actually make many, if any, decisions. We either just observe, or 99% observers. That's the free will thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have you listened to that voice closely? It's not your conscience. It's your mother.
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is.
Yeah, the conscience big God. There's a big conversation going on. Okay, we're gonna have to skip to the end, people. Well, yes, the questions are all down here. Whooper Nation. We have the third way: Christian, half Christ, half Satan, all boyo. You don't make decisions; you choose which God you obey. Yeah, I'm interested in that. Satan and analysis paralysis. How getting things done framework can help you set up your war with the evil one. Available on Amazon. Oh, that's a book proposition. You will need to state your religion on this visa application. This is from Sam Howley. You will need to state your religion on this visa application. Generally, I do what these two guys on YouTube say. YouTube-tarian.
Wow. So basically PewDiePie is the prophet.
Yes. Okay, here we go. Are you young boys or young boyos?
Young boyos, of course.
Okay. Yes. Yes. Cool.
That's definitely an established truth. Just like Jesus existed, we'll take that as a truth of the universe. Young Boyos is also an established truth of the universe.
Have you two read Kierkegaard, the Christian existentialist? He talks about very similar things. I've read one piece of him, find it very interesting. I actually might get into him more. He talks about the dizzying fear of freedom, the anxiety of freedom. I think he's an interesting chap, all right. And I heard that he went through the philosophical problem. He was about I think the 17th or 18th century. He started contemplating the whole God is dead problem and the whole existential problem of what it means to be a man. And he concluded, like, he hit Christianity pretty hard in the end.
Yeah, I'd really like to get into Kierkegaard because he seems spot on the money. Not read him, but I want to get through Dostoevsky first properly, so that then I can move on to him. Basically, the Christian apologists, and then also C.S. Lewis sounds pretty good, but he's nowhere near as deep as those two.
Yes, yes. Sodom, San Francisco, and Lundistan. What's Belgrade or big Irish cities? I think what's going on is that the modern cosmopolitan city is so the big conflict in the world right now is between the national cultural identities of nation states that have a unique Irish culture, unique English culture, unique French culture, unique German culture. And these are all like pagan in a way, if you want to think of it this way. And the gods above those cities are the spirit of the people who live in them. So Dublin was a manifestation of the spirit of the Irish, London a manifestation of the spirit of the English, and Berlin a manifestation of the spirit of the Germans, Paris likewise. And what's this getting replaced by is the new modern religion you see forming, which is the cosmopolitan, globalized, multicultural. The culture is based on like really sugary hip hop. Everybody eats donuts, very American, very capitalist, quite. Everybody wears like runners with like suits, and everything is coagulating into this Instagram culture of sorts. And that's a new god that's starting to replace all of this. I guess you could say it's capitalism's end game. And a lot of people love to deify capitalism. I'm not an all-out capitalism is the greatest thing that ever existed. Like I think there's some very, very good criticisms of it, but that could have just been my brainwashing from reading the Communist Manifesto. But it does have that ability to just utterly steamroll any sense of culture and create this monoculture of sorts. And this monoculture is what's entering into all these cities all around the world. And what's scary about that is that it's not just Sodom and Gomorrah. It's not just one city. It seems to be all the cities because it's the entire culture. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, capitalism is an economic system for sure. So it's very difficult to know if this is an end result of capitalism or if this is an end result of not having other values. Because in which case, what would a capitalistic Christian society look like if it was truly Christian? I don't know. Maybe way more compassionate, something like that. Because within capitalism, what you've deified is the ability to earn money, to sort of turn into that machine, which is brilliant economically. But maybe, I don't know, I haven't thought about this because I am a capitalist. But maybe that's not completely and utterly aligned with Christianity, unless you have everyone giving their money to charity, because that would solve a lot of problems. If you were still a bunch of religious people, going around with their old beautiful pilgrim outfits, then it actually looks like a tea towel now. I can't have that. Then you have everybody who would still be going to church together. You still have the family. You would still have families together, and then at the same time you'd be giving to the poor all the damn time, like Jesus did. So it seems to be like it could work. And it's like, I've actually not seen an intelligent person who's a capitalist also not criticize it, because they're like, it's not a perfect, but it's the best we've ever had, right? Because what are the alternatives to that except socialism or anarchism? There aren't really any.
Yeah. I've heard Molyneux, for example, would be I think an anarcho-capitalist. I don't really understand this stuff too well to really get into it though, but it is, I would boil it down to the cultural thing. That's the stuff I'd be most sensitive to. And the way capitalism works in the modern world is it essentially is a race to the bottom culturally, and it's creating a monoculture which is dominated by the idea of sales. Instead of going to church, you go to shopping centers. People don't meet each other anywhere anymore unless they're going for shopping centers and stuff like that. So it's culture's getting changed by marketing essentially. It's the It's the Faustian bargain, man. It's that idea of what Bernays conceived. He's like, we got to change society. We've got to subvert traditional culture from being a wants society or a needs society where people just buy what they need and then, you know, stay in church and live the old way. We've got to create a new way of living. We've got to change culture. And so Bernays was like, let's create the democratic ideal where everybody can live a lifestyle that they want and they can be all into lifestyle design and all that shit. And so he got all into that, and it changed. We're living in the end game of that, pretty much, you know. So it's very interesting.
Just a really small thing to add. Somebody like Molyneux or anarcho-capitalist will say that capitalism works because people will actually morally object to any kind of dodginess going on, and then they'll stop feeding into the companies. There's the whole thing regarding like, would you serve a black person? And if a company says no, then everyone goes, we ain't serving for you anymore. So it's actually based on a moral integrity together. But when that disappears, then you have this. Because really what we should have in the modern world is everyone saying, we don't do Instagram here because Instagram makes you sick and Instagram is not good for anybody. But they don't have that underlying value system. So they'll just follow whatever the machine goes to.
This is I think the inherent problem is total libertarian capitalism is anti-moral, because what sells is desire. What sells is Eros, not logos. And so if you create a society based on sales, total free market, Eros wins. And then what happens is logos, morals lose. And so people don't have morals. And so when it comes to making moral decisions, people will try, but the social dominance will be for Eros. People will buy what's trendy, fashionable, likable. So it's not about, the system will never replace. Like, this is always the thing. People are always trying to create, how do we create a system that fixes everything? And I always wonder is like, is the answer actually about getting the spirit of the people sorted, you know?
I think so. I'd be on board with that 100%.
So that's interesting. Because like, even like the Hitler thing, like he changed the German economy incredibly fast, and he was a socialist, you know, and that was all because he really focused on just a different angle. He was all about getting the German people all hyped. It was like, yeah, we're gonna fuck the Versailles Treaty, we're gonna build up a great place here, and everybody else in the world was going through a depression, whereas he was sorting out the entire fucking like, the German economy had a miracle. People cannot believe it when they study it now. They essentially, well, they beat the Great Depression, which is just fucking ridiculous. Interesting gods worth investigating. Thoughts, sir?
On interesting gods.
Yes. Gods. Odin, definitely. Odin's amazing.
Due to personal experience, Athena.
Yeah.
Athena's huge, man. Huge in my life. Just huge idea.
All of the gods. Oh, there's so many gods, man. The Egyptian ones that I know, Horus, Set. That story is what is really good. Horus, Set, Osiris, Isis. Obviously, that's a brilliant one. Thoth from the Egyptians. That's another great one. You can get into anything Greek. Ares and Aphrodite and Hephaestion, I think his name is. So that's a brilliant little story. You've got the idea of Aphrodite and Hephaestion, the Vulcan, the hammer, the god of the blacksmith, are married. And then you have Ares, who is the ruthless warrior energy that everybody sort of dislikes. But Aphrodite cheats on her husband with Ares. And so you get in there this beautiful little story that tells you everything you need to know about male-female dynamics. The Nietzsche coins well. It's careless, mocking, forceful. That's how wisdom wants us, because she is a woman and saves herself only for the warrior. And it's that irresistible energy and polarity between masculinity and femininity, where the violent warrior is always the one that attracts the bad guy. Violent warrior is always he who attracts the beautiful woman. And so I think that's a beautiful story. There's the Irish have Dagda. He's interesting. They also have their very unique sovereignty gods, and Balor of Evil Eye in Irish. That's a good one. Any other thoughts, James?
To be honest with you, all of them. It gets really weird, but like, pick a pantheon and see what's going on, because they have a harmonious relationship with each other. And I really like the Greek ones, because they're always having a fight as to who should, because they all fight each other constantly. It's like whose will gets to be exerted here. And so when you try and look at them in a psychological lens, it's like, what's the value here that's fighting this other value? There's Apollo seems to be way more cucked than the way that Nietzsche puts it forward, at least in some of the stories. But I just say pick a pantheon and then go to town on it.
Yeah, see, this is the other thing about just outrightly condemning paganism is that, man, like there's something in it that just snaps people's attention. Like it's so much fun. There's something really it really speaks to you, know. And I think Jung will speak about here later that it's almost an offense for an artist to betray paganism, because the artist is all about Eros, and pagan conceptions of the world is exactly what you get when you conceptualize Eros. And that's Nietzsche's assertion too, is that the people who would have been pagan would have almost always been total warrior cults, because they're so strong that they don't even need that much logos. They get led by their violent instincts. And so the strong would always have a sense of pagan godliness, but it takes a more balanced morality, such as an assertive monotheism, to equip both the poor and the strong within a super society like Rome. And this is very interesting. All right, let's keep going, because we've got loads of stuff here. Question: ego inflation and identifying with the god archetype, ultimate pickup strategy. Yes, actually, to be honest, man, actually, yes. You know, I know you're only ripping the piss, but you're not at the same time. Like when you're with a woman, she wants to. You got to be arrogant, but not take yourself serious. Do you know what I mean? Like you've got to be fun in that type of sense. You'll notice that a lot of the best humor is circulating around the idea of either self-depreciation or self-boasting, if you know what I mean. People putting themselves forward assertively. That is the fine line that humor seems to dance upon. The Irish would put yourself down a lot. That's the self-depreciating part. But then you get someone like Conor McGregor, who's hilarious, but he's not really like a good at cracking jokes. He's just really, really assertive. So he's like super funny in that type of sense. It's like, oh my God, look how confident that person is. Look how that person's got a God complex, but they're irresistible to watch. And so, yeah, you want to have that dance of some sort of really being able to put yourself forward in that way and believing in yourself and making it funny though as well, like that type of thing. That would be my spin. That's my little bit of pickup advice, boyos.
Yeah, I do agree with that. The problem is proper ego inflation would not lend you very well to the field of pickup artistry. To have a little bit of it, a little bit of a swollen ego, you know, that's pretty good. Basically, Andrew Tate. Because Andrew Tate is like, you've got to have the G mindset. You've got to believe that you are the shit. It's like, yeah, that's pretty good. But to actually believe that you are one with the inner universe, it's like that might not be the best strategy going forward. You might want to keep some little bit of ego integrity there as well. Otherwise, you're basically walking around as I am Jesus Christ, resurrected from the dead. It's not going to suck itself. It's like that's not going to work.
I believe that would do better than what I would consider the most negative form of ego inflation, which is entitlement. So the worst thing you can have when it comes to women is the sense that they owe you anything, and you'll often get that way in yourself and even other lads as well, where they'll go out and they'll try pick up some women, and the women will be like, oh my God, no. And then they'll get rejected, and they'll take that rejection to their very fucking soul, because they had this inflated ego that they were somehow like gods of sorts. And so your inability to take rejection is what will curse you with women. And that's an ego inflation situation. When you overcome that, if you try to compensate that by pretending you're God, that will also come across as quite inauthentic. It will be better though than the other way. It'll be quite funny and ridiculous. It will be much better than the other way, but it won't take you all the way to the end game, which is to be, you know, as much as yourself, as the best part of yourself as you can be, which is like a cocky, arrogant arsehole, but also not being so serious about it and having a loving tinge too.
Yeah, I'd say if you want to pick up the ladies, obviously it might be something you want to do. I used to hang out. So some of the guys I used to hang out with who are more alpha types, they would have no issue going out. They'd be their authentic self, and then they would pull every single time. But some of my other friends who'd be like the more weedy types, they'd be more beta, whatever. They would go out and then they wouldn't be confident at all. But then I'd get them drunk as shit. And then they would not give a shit. They would stop focusing on I've got to get laid, and they start focusing on I want to be my authentic self. And so that they would go, like one of them went up to just these couple girls and was like, me, we're playing spin the bottle now. And then he like faked the spin the bottle. And then he was like, oh dear. And then the girl completely, she was like, okay, you can have me now. And it's like it's about being that authentic, confident self, I guess. It's psychological healthiness in a way, or authenticity. So maybe what Jung's saying in this paragraph is, in order to be psychologically healthy, a consequence of that is you'll be able to get laid. So maybe that's an incentive for you.
Boys, it's time to drop the bomb. This is BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed fired all their journalists. They moved here. This has not been about religion. You're all fools. What the fuck are you thinking? This has all been about how you get bitches. This is what it's all been about. We've just been building you up so we can drop the bomb, all right? So this is how. So you go out and you play spin the bottle all the time, and when it lands on you, you say ego inflation and grab them and you get with them, and then that's it. You've done.
Yes, and also girls love it when you talk about the flat earth. They love it because if you're a really authentic flat earther, she's like, God, he's got such a good soul. I might as well make love to him in the next few hours.
Would you like to lie down with me on the flat earth?
would you like to be parallel with the earth itself, my love? And then she gets it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. God is dead. I came for demons. Is there a devil's advocate God? The trickster. The trickster is another pagan archetype that's astounding. Like think of Kek and Pepe and what happened with that. People went on the internet, they just got into the zone with humor. They were like, oh, this is funny. It's funny to stick up this meme of a frog wearing a Hitler hat. And they just led with that. And it began to form a coherent world narrative that began to actually challenge the mainstream narrative enough anyway down there to have an influence on an election. Unbelievable. That was the trickster who was probably a tool of God coming down and leading the game. That's so amazing. It's so amazing. Brilliant to catch you live, boys. Boyos. Best channel on YouTube. Well, thank you very much, Alchemist Daughter. Wappa Nation. Hello, boyo. Hello, boyo. Wappa Nation, what's up? Interesting thought. Did science kill God or did Christians kill God because they weren't truly Christian, not living enough as the self like Jesus? Good question.
Jesus Christ. Science came from Christianity because it was an emphasis on truth. I don't necessarily think science has to be at odds with Christianity. If you look at the earliest Christians, you had people like Isaac Newton and Neil deGrasse Tyson, the god of science. He owns all of Isaac Newton's works, all of them, and he says he reads them all the time. And then in another interview, he's like, "Yeah, well, he wasted most of his time doing alchemy." It's like, no, not quite, because you're missing the point of what he's getting at here. So and my thoughts are still scattered here, but there seems to be something went corrupt along the way. No. I don't necessarily think science caused the death of God. It was something else. It may have involved science, but there's always been biases and agendas within the heart of science itself. So it stopped necessarily being a will to truth as well. Like there is some dodginess within the heart of at least modern science that I think that was independent of science, but still a consequence of it. So it's complicated.
There's two possibilities in my mind, maybe three. One of them involves a conspiracy, another involves the conspiracy of Satan, and another involves just intellectual, the evolution of ideas, which is an accident. So I'll give the most based one, which is the intellectual idea. The idea was that exactly what me and James were doing earlier, where we were like, okay, fuck. We just need to read the Bible instead of listening to the Catholics. And the Protestant Revolution forced people to actually confront that problem. It's the postmodern problem. And so what they started to do was being like, how do we assert what is the truth about what happened to Jesus as opposed to what we're being told? And so they realized that all these different perspectives about what happened to Jesus need to all revolve around getting the true story, what actually went down. And that became a will to an objective truth, specifically within the context of the Bible. And then that evolved into the idea of, all right, if there's a truth about what happened to the Bible, that must be connected to the nature of the cosmos as well. There must be a way of looking at the world that is virtually invulnerable to any type of perspective all of us are having. And so what they come up with the idea is this objective truth. That's God's truth in some sense. But then when they apply that objective truth onto the world, they say, well, in order for us to know what that objective truth is made up of, we can't make any assumptions. Perspectives inherently involves things like superstition wrapped up in them. We can't make assumptions about the way the world is based on emotions or eros. It's pure logos. And so by doing that, They've distilled it. It is alchemy. They've distilled out of it the idea of pure logos. By doing that, they realized that God was a superstition and a perspective. And when you actually look at the world exactly as it appears to your eyes, because they said empiricism is the way that we'll figure out what is truth, as it appears to reality, outside of the way you might have this vision of God, because that's unreliable. That's just your perspective. What is outside of all the people's vision is this objective truth, and there is no God there. And so God got murdered by the ideological process. That led to the idea of science. Then it's like, or what is out there? And it became very materialistic because it was all about what's tactilely out there, can be measured. And bang, you start churning through it. And then suddenly you start building the modern world because you get incredible mastery over matter. So that's one possibility. I think that's a very, very, very reasonable possibility about what happened. The evolution of ideas led us to that conclusion. And now people are starting to bounce back into the idea of phenomenology, subjectivism, psychedelics, Eros. They're starting to get back into that stuff because it seems to be relevant. And the more we've thrown that out, the more empty the modern world has felt because of the death of science that it brought. The other possibility then is that the people like the Freemasons and whatnot may have got very wrapped up in the idea of the Faustian spirit being a problem where people are stuck into Christian ignorance. And so they're like, all right, God's will. And then you come into them and you're like, yeah, but what about, maybe we can find our own way out of this fallen world instead of waiting for God to save. And it's like, no, we will not disobey God. So these people were like, all right, we need to set up a lot of secret societies and assert a new way of running things and build towards a new world, because God's world is not true. It's not coming true or whatever. They hated the submission element of the Christians. And so they tackled the Christian spirit. And that's why the modern world is more related to anti-Christian as opposed to anti-God. People are very, very freely allowed to worship pagan gods and all that stuff, and talk about beings and all that crazy shit, but they're not allowed to assert that the Bible's true, for example. There's that one. And I forget the third one. But I guess there's and the other one might be Satan is involved with this somehow. An evil being like arrived via Faust. This is a sort of what the Aion lectures are about. And instigated this mimetic way of looking at the world in people and controlled both of these processes. So we could say that the Antichrist started coming 500 years ago. And first he got all these secret societies to undermine the Christian religion. And then he got all these scientists to start getting obsessed with this idea of, destroying spirituality and getting into matter. And this is interesting because this is tangibly what seemed to have happened. You have people like Newton who are talking about alchemy the whole time and talking about communicating with spirits. You have Darwin who says that quite a lot of his information came to him from demons. And you have Descartes who said that he was traveling one day and he was sitting in his bunker after he was part of an army. And what happened was he was lying there, and in the middle of the night an angel came to him and said, matter will be conquested by use of number and measure, or something like that, or nature will be conquested by use of number and measure. And so he was told the ideal of science through an angel, which is interesting. Aleister Crowley, do what thy will should be the whole of the law. The new morality came from a man so he went down and got on his knees at 12 o'clock every day in Egypt. And this god called Aion, who, when you draw pictures of him, looks like a fucking alien, came in and told him this new morality for the future. So all these things have very, very interesting metaphysical possibilities as well. And of those three paths, whereas one of them controls both of them, I'm not really sure which, but that would be my spin on all that. Yeah. And so did Christians lose it? I'd say it's also possible that Christians started to cuck a lot in their religion. The Catholic Church and its flaws may have manifested completely. And it could have been them. I think it's on everybody's shoulders, but they're the three main primal causes I see.
I would actually love to. Being a scientist interested in the history of science, there's a lot I could say on this. I do think that the occult has a massive, massive part of this, because the occult is not something you can just laugh away as being stupid. It's real. It's really engaging in psychological experiences. And a lot of the original major scientists were occultists. Very strange. John Dee being the most prominent one, of course, he basically ran England more or less in Elizabethan times. He was this huge, absolute big deal. Bacon, who created the scientific method, it was originally originally called the Baconian method. They didn't really pick up too much steam, but the groundwork was there. He was an occultist. Newton was very much, he was a Freemason. He was into the occult and alchemy and things like that. That definitely has some kind of influence to it. But if your hypothesis there about the Catholic Church being a problem, therefore, like we'll say a lie, however many, like a cluster of lies led to the unraveling, then it's like, in which case you go immediately back to what you've talked about in this lecture on the importance of truth and honesty and not breaking it for anything. Because once that lie becomes, you end into a position of responsibility over people, like a king, for example, and you lie, that's where all the snakes can start coming up through. Say, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. I do not think that science is inherently sinister, though. I really don't. I think it can be a very, very good, healthy Christian enterprise.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, science is a completely neutral tool. There's nothing inherently wrong with it at all. It's about discovering knowledge. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The problem that could have happened is the Catholic Church could have gotten dogmatic by the nature of the doctrine that it works with. Everything gets dogmatic, just like science is getting dogmatic now. We should say science with a capital S is sort of what's getting dogmatic right now. And
okay, there's something I do, I guess, want to say. This is not a thing about my opinions on evolution, for example, but this just made me feel a bit shady. The biggest scientific magazine in the world, biggest scientific publication, is called Nature. If you get a paper published in Nature, you're good to go forever. It's huge. This was started by 4 English intellectuals in the middle of the 1800s. The purpose of it was to support Darwin's theory of evolution. One of the guys who started it was called Darwin's Bulldog. And it all goes into the story of evolution. So it's like, that's weird to me. That's not, we're going to push forward things for the love of science, or we're not going to elucidate the mysteries of creation for the glory of God. Because that's what the biblical version of it would be. You do it in the honor of glory of God. We're going to do it to push evolution. It's like, that's just weird, because that's not the spirit of science. There's like the soul of science in many ways is Christian. You're doing things to exalt God's creation. You love it so much, you want to learn more about it. So that rubs me up the wrong way, man. There's something rotten at the heart of that.
And I guess what we're doing here is we're criticizing, we're playing, we're in many senses loosening up the boundaries around these categories about what is religion, what is psychology, what is the way you're supposed to view the world. And we came up with that problem where there was this story, which was Jesus's story. And from that, people built a dogma, which was the Catholic Church. And that dogma lasted for 1,000 years, pretty much. And the problem was that dogma became dogmatic. That dogma became dogmatic, and people couldn't get it couldn't evolve. And it seems like it's not necessarily accurate. It's based on many pagan rituals, for example. It's not like most of the stuff that goes on in Catholicism is, like the special days and all that are based on pagan rituals. And so it got stringent, it got stuck, and the Catholics weren't probably obeying the logos enough to allow it to evolve. Maybe there's a perfect balance where if you're just logos enough, these institutions can keep evolving, these things can keep evolving. And so they got stringent on that. And what happened is a load of people started to say, all right, fuck these guys. The only way I can go and learn stuff is by going into the church or something like that. Going into the occult or something. That's what could have possibly happened. And the problem there is that these people weren't perhaps spiritually gifted enough that they would realize that they could have been getting communicated with perhaps, like, you go into the occult, you're not just getting good figures, you're getting also bad figures, and you don't know which ones are going to get control over you. And their nature is deception. It's the same idea with psychedelics. Like, you're getting into amazing experiences, but also the ability to get like some deep parasites. You don't know what's going on there with that type of shit. So it might have been that need for the Catholic Church to evolve. It failed, and so it got taken over by an institution that eventually turned against it. And now that institution is the Catholic Church, which is fucking crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. How many more questions have we got? Because I've got a Sunday to go attend to.
That's quite, yes. The Bible is not about Jews. Rabbinical Judaism is the religion of the Pharisees as codified in the Talmud after Christ. Look it up. Christianity predates Judaism. This is true. And Christianity was 200 years younger than Judaism. Judaism was formed in Babylon after Christianity was taking over Rome. What generally happened is Jesus came in, like we were saying there, and tried to update the Pharisees on their religion. They got dogmatic like the Catholic Church did, and they were like, this is how you do things. Jesus shows up and says, look, I'm legitimately from God. I'm here to tell you that you're all wrong. And they're like, well, we're going to kill you. And he said, if you kill me, that your temple is going to get destroyed. To be honest, your temple is going to get destroyed anyway because you are going to kill me because I'm God and I know everything. And so they murdered him, and then their temple got destroyed. They started revolting against Rome, and then the Romans were like, "Oh, you fucking idiots!" So they went in and they smashed them, and then sent them off to Babylon and made Palestine. That lasted up until 1948. And the Jews, well, these weren't even Jews at this point. They're just from the tribe of Judah. They were like, "Fuck, we need to preserve our religion, our story, our the integrity of our tribe." And so they formulated the Talmud in Babylon, where they were exiled at that point. That was the rabbi Jew thing, and that's where you start to get this idea of it being a commentary, because there's this paradox within the Bible where it does all generally point to Jesus, and the Jews had to sort of rationalize and be like, all right, Jesus was a false Messiah, and we're still waiting for the Messiah. And that led them to that really, really difficult problem where they've got a great amount of tension in them, where they need a revolution to happen for the Messiah to come. They're still waiting. The Jews are characterized by this wandering around and not having a home, which they've now solved with Israel. But they're also characterized by this inability to get a home because they don't have a savior. And so they're characterized by this longing and yearning for God to give them a savior. And so the radical Judaism had to deny the savior that the Christians asserted, and believe that the savior for them will come in the future at some point, and he'll be a warlord who will give them back Israel. So it's interesting. Sweatpants are Titanic. Monoculture is the Tower of Babel. James almost nailed capitalism, and failures are not capitalism, but Marxist, postmodernist, no values, loss of value, selling, not saving up. Yeah. The light over cocky God. That is the G mindset. They earned it. The gate. Thank you, Tom. Okay, here, last question. Did either of y'all watch the Vox Day and JSF evolution debate on the problem of measurability in the rate of fixed genetic mutations within a population? And we'll call that the last question, people. Thank you very much. I'm going to give that to James.
Yes, I did watch that, actually, because obviously that falls under my domain. So I got it from Owen Benjamin, and Owen Benjamin seems to be slightly mentally ill at the moment. That's not a criticism of him necessarily, but he's just he's not very happy. We'll put it like that. And he was whatever, saying it was very one-sided. The debate was actually quite pleasant. It was actually quite pleasant. Vox Day was going into it legitimately wanting to try and find answers, and it seemed so did the other dude, the really depressed-looking French dude. The reason that they butted heads on the idea of Vox Day won that. He won that debate if what's important is a fixed mutation, because then there is not enough time for a fixed mutation to have made place, in which case he's then debunked the theory of evolution, at least in terms of how we're told it. What the other guy was saying is that it's not fixed mutations that's important. It's just general mutations which happen to take over the population. I do not know what to make of that one little bit, because I don't know which is the most important one. And that's concerning, because we should have some kind of doctrine which makes this crystal clear. To me, it seems highly likely that a fixed mutation is what should matter. Rather, because if you just have somebody with a random mutation, the chances of that mutation being beneficial, and therefore being so beneficial to the point where you can actually survive the selection pressure from the environment, therefore making it a fixed mutation by virtue of you surviving, that sounds to me how the theory of evolution should work. So I don't know what to make of it. It's something which I'm not taught in school. It's something you're not taught to question, but I will question it. I'm very interested in it. And if Vox Day turns out to be right, then he turns out to be right, in which case that becomes a really big problem. Until then, I don't know, but it was a very interesting, useful debate.
Okay, so may I ask a few things as a man of ignorance in this matter? So they're saying that if quantifiably, if evolution happens at a rate, you should be able to give that number, but they can't give that number?
Yeah, so what Vox Day was doing is he was saying you need a fixed mutation in order for a change to come about in the population. And he ran the numbers and basically said there's not enough time given over the course of evolution for this many number of fixed mutations. We'll say between bacteria and a human, he calculated the difference between them. There's not enough time for that to have happened. So the French guy said, you're correct, except it's not fixed mutation is not what's important. It's mutation in general. But then I don't really understand that. And then he got really weird with it as well. And this is where I started to go, hang on a minute, that's dodgy. Bearing in mind, this guy's he's not speaking for the scientific community. He's still another dude like Vox Day, right? But he was saying species don't exist, and that we're all technically really malleable and flowy. But it's like, that's really not true. That's completely and utterly not true. Species exist. It's not an arbitrary definition. If you can breed with somebody and produce fertile offspring, that's a species. And that happens to matter, because if we get put in an environment that's slightly different to where we are now, we die. Like, we cannot survive. We're creatures of wanting to maintain homeostasis within our bodies and within each other on a psychic level. So there is a certain level of fixedness to us. And if you remove that from the picture, then I don't know what the hell you get. That's just weird to me. So I think he's wrong. But then at the same point, I do not know enough to say that his principle of fixed mutation isn't the canonical measure of evolution is necessarily wrong. You see what I mean?
Yes, interesting. That's a very interesting problem, because I do know that species definition is a very clear one. A tiger and a lion can have sex, but they won't produce. They'll produce a liger, but the liger won't be able to produce anything. They'll be sterile. The same with a mule, I believe. And so sterilization is that's quite clearly saying that these animals are built in a certain way. And what Vox was challenging him and saying that, okay, I guess the only way I could see that become, and this is the real question. This is like, let's just boil down to the real fucking question here. Evolution is probably a thing where people change and mutate and adapt and all that, where, like, you have sex with someone and you're going to produce a kind of mix between the two of you. But the idea of going from a rock to mud to a bacteria to fully formed eyes and higher cognitive thinking is a very, 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 very big leap, even if you give it 13 billion years. And I think someone like Vox is starting to challenge that, saying that perhaps we were created as opposed to evolved, or maybe we just don't understand the way we evolved as well. And that's an interesting problem. Is that what he's sort of asserting there?
Yes, absolutely. That is what he's asserting. Now, my issue with this comes with, it is actually possible. It is possible that through small incremental changes, you can eventually get to somebody big. There's no reason in theory why that can't happen. But there is a problem highlighted by Michael Behe, who he is still a professor, I believe, but no one takes him seriously. And he said irreducible complexity, where you can't go from nothing to suddenly, his argument was, you can't go from nothing to suddenly a fully formed tail on a bacteria, because you can't have half a tail because it doesn't do anything, right? With eyes, you can have a little bit of sight, and then that gives you an advantage. So you can discriminate between light and dark. That can work. With a tail, no, you can't, because you just get what? A little block of protein that can't move. No, that's pointless. So you'd have to go from that to a fully formed tail. He has had critiques in terms of computer models, but that whole issue is not ever talked about. It's just, you accept this fact. And to me, it's like, how could you go from asexual to sexual reproduction? That's something that has not yet been explained. And what I don't necessarily disbelieve in the theory of evolution, as it might be coming across to somebody. It's like, I'm just interested as to how it works, to be honest with you. And I welcome the healthy debate, because that can only be good for all of us, right?
Yeah, most certainly. I think it's I know that they have awful trouble with evolution, in that they have to update the theory the whole time, because they're not sure exactly how it works. And this is a very important argument to get right, because if you conceptualize evolution as Darwinian, you quite quickly have to jump into social Darwin. If Darwin is right, I'm pretty sure racial theory is right. You know what I mean? Like, it kind of goes there. You look at Nietzsche and Nietzsche's assertion of how all the different races work in the Übermensch, and the idea that the only way forward for the human race is to create a super race of human beings. And that's all based on evolution. That's all premised on the idea that we grew out of ignorance and nothing, and this is our one chance where we can leap into the stars. And that's what Nietzsche's asserting with the idea of the Übermensch. And Darwin or Marx was the exact same. The idea of social Darwinism was the idea that the way societies evolve, communism is the next step, and it's sort of infallible. If like, the best way, that's something that communists assert very strongly, is that, like, all right, communism is the next evolutionary step and all that. So if you challenge the idea of evolution to some extent and change the mechanisms, we may to a large extent change our conception of how progress works. I know that if you have it in your head that it's all about a strict Darwinian evolution, you become a lot more like Nietzsche, you become a lot more like Marx. But if you become a bit more like, I think there's this French guy, I forget his name, but he said that consciousness has a role. And he said that the way that evolution happens is that the inner being consciousness chooses which direction that goes, and so it's a sort of, it's a symbiosis between the consciousness in matter and also the matter that it controls. And so that's a lot more along the lines of epigenetics, I guess you could say.
Oh yeah, epigenetics is also huge. We know Richard Dawkins, actually, he says the world is a Darwinian place, but thank God we aren't. And so I always had trouble with that, because it's like, where do you get your morality from? Has it evolved over the course? Because it's a selfish gene idea. It's like, why will one bison give its life for the herd of bison? Doesn't make any sense. And then that's where the selfish gene idea, a gene in one particular incarnation will sacrifice itself for a whole bunch of other genes, in which case you could get a little bit dodgy there and start, not even necessarily racial, it would be more like family based. The hierarchy of who you care about would be who's the closest genetically related to you, yeah. which is dodgy. So then where does morality come from? Did it evolve in terms of group dynamics? So yeah, probably, because that seems to help everybody. But you do come up against a serious problem there. And the thing is, it's not addressed and it's not talked about, which really burns me. It really, really burns me. It's like, if just try. Imagine if I went in tomorrow and went up to my professor and was like, I have a question about evolution. How could this work? The response wouldn't be, now that's really interesting. Let me walk you through. It would be like, don't be an idiot. Don't do it. Just cease. It's like, no, dude. Like science has a pure soul, as far as I'm concerned, but scientists don't necessarily.
Yeah, it's that idea of the Catholic Church. The way science came about was, there's probably a lot of people in the Catholic Church, as I was conceptualizing earlier, that wanted to speak the truth and to obey the logos. And the Catholic Church has been too dogmatic, and so they invented science. Now science has become the Catholic Church, and there's a lot of people being like, fuck, like, I mean, Vox Day, I'll have to go talk to him now or some shit. On that bombshell, people, Lamarck and Goethe are who you're referring to as the willful. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Shadowfire. Drinking urine is vital to becoming the Übermensch. Thank you, Raphael. Fruchtfleisch. You're just chemicals, then destroy yourself like communists into dust. Jesus Lord. People, we're going to bounce. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed. Hop into the description below to find the Discord, and you can pop in and talk to us about all things Jung, all things about psychological self-improvement, and you can just generally contact us there. My Twitter is below as well if you want to drop a message of some sort. And again, thank you very much for all your time. And James, any last words?
Yes. Make sure that you go about and you spread the peace of Christ, to love and preserve the Lord. Whatever the hell they end a Catholic mass with, something like that.
Fucking preacher over here. But nonetheless, he's a good soulful boyo. And I have a new camera, and it is all good. I'll talk to you later, people. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.